Where'd Pam go? Okay. Pam, you know we were upgraded to unlimited minutes?
Okay.
All right. A person that says iPhone, could you please identify yourself?
Andy, that's Barbara Silverio, Principal, Pearson.
Oh, okay, then I'll rename her.
Thank you.
Oh, thank God.
For some reason, the Zoom went to a basic plan instead of large 500.
Why did it do that?
I don't know. So now it did. Because you tried to add Pam as a basic and it switched the roles. So it's good now. You're in the Zoom at townofwinchester.org, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good now.
I don't,
And
I
that's
wonder
why I
what.
said it. As soon as went up there and I'm saying, why is my Zoom saying basic?
Okay, are we live?
You're live.
Okay, we're live. Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm gonna take my mask off. Sheila and Mark have to move away a little bit. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Selectmen special meeting on May 14th, 2020. This is a public hearing on the Board of Education budget and the Town Manager, Board of Selectmen budget. So the first thing we're going to do is have a call to order of the Board of Selectmen. May I start in our usual seating order? So Candace, please.
Candace Bouchard.
Otto Shalashi.
Melissa Bird.
Bob Geiger.
Candy Perez.
Sheila Sedlak.
Sheila said hello.
I did.
That means Jack.
Jack Bork. Stephen Sedlak.
Linda Guapo.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you please join us for a pledge to allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Just before we get going, I just want to review what this meeting looks like, the process for it. Basically, what we'll be doing is we'll be starting with the Board of Education. The Gilbert School will go first, followed by with Dr. Tony Serio. Then it'll be followed by the Board of Education with Superintendent Melanie Brady Shanley. After that, once that happens, Board of Selectmen will be able to ask questions if we want, and then we will go to public comment. In public comment, we put out the news release on it. The public comment is exactly the way we did it when we were in person at the Pearson School. We will start with public comment. People will get 5 minutes in the first round. 5. I'll put a timer on. You get 5 minutes in the first round. Then after that, everybody speaks. When we run out of speakers, if somebody wants another turn, that would be okay. And the second round is 3 minutes. 3. And then everybody speaks. And if somebody needs a third turn, then we give another 3 minutes. And we'll keep going until which time it's either unproductive to continue the discussion because we already have all the information we need, or nobody has any more questions. So again, we'll start with the superintendents, then we'll go into the comment phase, and then after that, we'll be moving into the town public hearing on the budget, which encompasses the entire budget. The Board of Selectmen doesn't have to make any decisions tonight. There is an action item, but we do not have to do anything about the budget tonight. We have May 18th, next Monday, to make adjustments. And if we need more meetings before May 21st, when we decide and set the budget and the mill rate, we will certainly have those. Public comment is welcome, not only just through here tonight, but we've issued out a bunch of ways to make comment. There are 3 emails out there to send in comments. There's a phone number to send in voice comments. Tonight we also have a regular phone line to call into for people that may not be on the computer. So public comments can also come by regular mail. But all of the public comments have to come before May 20th in order for us to consider them on the 21st. So again, we don't have, there may not be any final, there won't be final decisions made tonight because we have 2 more meetings to go, but we certainly will be listening, we will be asking questions. With that said, everybody just kind of give me a thumbs up if you're all with me on that, especially, okay? Good, because I can't, there's so many of you on now, you're like tiny little faces. So first up will be the Gilbert School, and I am going to attempt to share his screen. And if I could do that, great. If not, then he will have to, Dr. Serio will then have to come in and do that. So let me find it here. I pulled it all down earlier today, and they all came in, so here we are. So here is the Gilbert School budget. I will make it a little bit bigger. And Tony, you want to come on? Everybody else, please make sure you're muted, or Pam, if you could mute everybody, that'd be great. Except,
Yeah, I'm not, Candy, I'm not seeing my budget screen at this particular point on my screen.
okay, so do you want to share your screen, Tony?
Oh, you're muted, Candy.
Oh,
Candy?
yep, how about now? Tony, you want to share your screen?
I'm not seeing my screen. Are other people seeing my screen?
Yeah, but if you want to, if, they're not seeing it now because I just moved it. It's off to the side. So, well, crap.
Andy, the only person that can share the screen is the host, so
Right.
you'll have to make Tony the host in order for him to share his screen.
We made it so that everybody could,
Hang on a minute. Let me,
I lost my Zoom screen.
okay, hang on.
Pam, do you still have your screen up? I don't know.
He's got it now.
I see it now.
Yeah, I can't see anything.
Uh,
Hang on
I
a
did-
second. For some reason I am, where is it? Okay, now we're back. Okay, Tony, go ahead.
I'm, yeah, sorry, Candy, I'm just trying to find my screen again. Hang on a minute. I'm not sure if it's, no, mine is showing that I am sharing my screen, so I'm going to assume I am sharing my screen at this particular point.
Right, so go to slideshow.
Okay, I have to, yeah. Hang on a minute, let me get over here. Gotta move it so I can say slideshow. Here we go. Gotta go to play. Let me see if I can make it larger. That might help.
It helps a little bit, but if you could go to show slides.
Yeah, no, I'm going to go to slideshow right now.
Okay, good. Oh, there we
All right.
go.
Yeah,
That's
no,
good.
I made it big so that you guys can all see it, I hope.
Yeah.
Very nice. So this is the budget. I just want to explain, this is pre-COVID budget. That's very important to emphasize for everybody. We do know that there's going to be great effect on school budgets. This is going to be on town budgets, the state's budget, and I would imagine even at the national level. I mention this because we know we're going to have greater expenses come up next year. For the Winchester Board of Education, obviously transportation would be involved. But I think what we're going to be seeing is blended learning. I do believe only a portion of our population of students are going to be able to come back to school. What do I mean by that? I mean, we're going to have staggered school days, maybe double sessions. We will have kids at home doing distance learning, and we'll have kids coming into school for instruction. We're going to have PPE available for them. We're going to have to practice social distancing inside the school. The school is going to look very different with sanitation stations in various areas, providing masks, maybe shields, and plexiglass dividers to separate students from one another, maybe even in a classroom. This is what we're facing with the start of school. I do believe that the online learning or distance learning will continue, as well as some students being able to come in. And I also believe that we're going to have to be prepared to make sure everybody has connectivity, because there'll probably be a period of time when we're ordered to stay home again as a second wave comes in. So this is a pre-COVID budget, which I delivered this particular slideshow back a ways ago, and that was on January 29th at a special meeting of the Finance Committee. But this is what we have to work with right now, so I'm going to work with it, and we will begin. So I'm glad I have my a slideshow printed out and next to me, because the pictures at the bottom of the screen are actually taking out the last bullet. I think and I want to thank Melanie. I can still see her on the screen. We worked together over several meetings in person, as well as cell phones, in order to put this budget together. Of course, the budget of the Winchester Board of Education was given to the town on March 15th, or probably prior to that. But prior to that, we worked together right up until my budget presentation, and Melanie had her budget presentation, so mine was on the 29th of January. You can see the messages here on the screen as far as what's in this budget. And you can see the agreed upon tuition. We are in the second year of a 3-year contract. We are trying to maintain our course electives and academic support. Now, it could be that we actually need more in the sense of staff and academic support, as I've been thinking about the kind of education the children are losing this year, and they might need tutors to help them get caught up next year and keep them going. We estimated 30 international students. At this particular point, I must tell you, I'm not sure that's going to happen. That particular number would have produced a tuition tuition that we would have gotten from the trust for the international students of $480,000. I am not sure the students will be able to get back into the U.S. And any new students may not find that the embassies are open in time for them to go and get their interviews and get their visas. Our students who already are here or have been with us actually have an F1 visa, and they can stay right through their graduation. So they could be here, if they start as a 9th grader, for 4 years on that F1 visa. So that's a positive. That's a good thing. And we're hoping that, in fact, we do find that the students are able to get back. But this will have impact upon us. And this is also based on the fact that we anticipate 448 Winchester students and 1 student from Scotland. Now, I'm sure that's probably a little bit too small for people to see at home, but what this is it's really a tribute to both boards, the School Corp and the Winchester Board of Education, allowing myself and Melanie to collaborate on coming up with this budget that has been provided to the town. And that collaboration is something we need. We need that collaboration going forward because this issue of COVID is going to have to take the collective energy of people in order to get through. The collective energy that is positive and understanding of one another's needs. So Melanie, I thank you again for all the collaboration, all the hard work that went into putting together a budget for the town for overall education. Budget drivers, these are unchanged from the 29th, but as I mentioned earlier, the second year of the 3-year teacher contract. The only new hire that is listed is a resource officer. There was an increase in medical benefits. The various, you know, we all know medical goes up. As we now know, our medical went up only 6%, not 10%. Thank goodness for that. But and of course the town also realizes that. And we have, of course, our instructional academic software. So that area only increased by 7.02%, but in the sense of dollars, it's much less than it appears to be. And we do have in this budget anticipated facilities improvements. You know, we hope to continue our initiatives of rigor in the curriculum, SRBI, so PBIS. And we like to have a comprehensive high school program which emphasizes the business courses as well as the academic courses, AP, as well as honors and college prep. That continues to be one of our goals. And how are we going to look at trying to save on our budget? Well, there's always the continued analysis of FTE, but it may be that we're going to find that this particular number is not the time to shrink a population of teachers, because quite frankly, we might be needing more staff in order to deliver a blended curriculum. The class sizes, obviously, we're always looking at those exclusive of the AP, of course, and the remedial. And we continue to look at ways to save on electricity and gas, and fuel oil. These are, you know, these are items that we often shop out to try to get new information, new pricing on those particular contracts. And of course, the high deductible plan, we all know that that went into effect in the 2017 fiscal year, and the cost of the premium has obviously gone up by 6%, but the teachers also have had increases over the last couple of years in regard to their share that they pay in this particular area. So here is our budget, and I'm going to just run through this quickly with you, because this page is an important page. It shows the difference between the last budget and this budget. Shows the increase. It's a 2.61% increase. Shows the again the tuition for the Winchester Board of Education at $7,179,393. It shows what we anticipated, $480,774, and the one student that's from the international program, and the Heartland student at $16,035. So there's a very important note, and I'm not sure if it's showing up on people's screens. It might be covered over, but it's really important to note that because of the shift in the population of students, that the WBOE student population, their proration of this budget went up automatically by one, and this is very important, I want to make sure people understand, it would have went up by 1.9% without any increase in the budget. So what would have occurred is that because they had a greater percentage of students that make up our student body, there was a shift that took place so that the tuition for Winchester, even if I stood still in my budget, would have still went up actually 2.07%, or $144,000 over the previous budget. But again, this is based on proportion of students that are in the building, pro rata. All right. Now this next page, I think, really shows us a little bit more about the budget, because the budget that I originally came up with was $8,060,153. The $250,000 reduction is something that I often refer to as unresolved. Unresolved. So it's an unresolved amount of money that, quite frankly, we have to find in our budget. Now, some of that might have become available through a process of early retirement incentive program. So the early retirement incentive program, we were hoping it would help us reduce the budget. We did have two retirees take, I should say future retirees, who did take advantage of that program. So I'm happy about that, that they're going to take on this incentive program. But in order for me to have that $7,810,153, I had to build in an unresolved amount of $250,000. Well, there's that 2.61 increase again. There's that almost $200,000 increase in budget. The next line is very important because in this budget is about $277,000 worth of capital improvements. But
Do you know where Mark
school
is?
corp did vote to take
Sheila,
$100,000 out of its
Huh?
capital
He went
sinking fund.
upstairs.
the stream stopped.
And when they
It's not
did
streaming.
that, it ended up
The YouTube.
changing the percentage increase to 1.31% of the overall budget for the Gilbert School, going up by $99,044, less than $100,000. The WBOE's tuition did go up. It did go up, as I mentioned. It would have went up anyways, 2.07%. But overall, it went up 3.4, 236,200. But again, I point out that this is also due to that pro-rata switch in the population. And of course, the salary area is, of course, one of the areas that you're going to find the greatest amount of our money. As you can see on the screen, it's 63.69% of our overall budget is the combined salaries, and they did go up. In there is also that resource officer, just so people understand the resource
Let
officer.
me check mine
is
because
part of
maybe
that.
it's just Jack.
Okay, she said she's checking, it might just be Jack.
And then, of course, benefits. Benefits are going to be the next largest area.
So hold on.
Produces 17.52% of our budget. This, of course, is makes the entire budget, when you think about the two, over 80%
There's a server error.
of our budget is really tied up in the area
Is it a
of
YouTube
compensation.
issue or?
Very significant number when you think about the overall numbers within a given budget. There's very little increase in any other area, except, of course, the capital improvements. But 81.2% overall in
It might be
increase.
YouTube.
He's trying to get that.
And then,
It's YouTube.
It's YouTube.
and that's that slide there showing the combination of benefits
It's YouTube.
as well as the the salary line,
No, YouTube's out.
81.21% of
YouTube
our
is
budget.
out.
And then you get into the areas of instructional supplies. And in this area here, like I mentioned, it's a very
It's YouTube.
slight, even though it says
It's YouTube.
7.02%, it's a total of $17,450.
No, it's YouTube.
Okay, YouTube is separate.
That's all
She said,
that
no,
it went
there's
up.
nothing you can do because it's YouTube, so that's gonna be separate.
And of course, we see a very slight increase in maintenance
chicken razors.
of the building, maintenance custodial equipment. Now, this is probably a slide that, if I knew the figures today, would be one of the slides I would change, because we know that the issues of sanitizing the building will probably increase the amount of need for various types of equipment, as we are looking into some sanitizing equipment. We're also looking into sanitizing dispenser stations, as well as sanitizing centers that will be in each room, and those will have to be replenished. I'm not even talking about, at this particular point, the PPE. I'm just discussing now this issue of sanitization. If we're in that blended education model, to be honest about it, we're going to have a circumstance on our hands where, quite frankly, probably going to be sanitizing the building throughout the day, and probably will need extra people on staff in the custodial area in order to be able to do that. So this is one of those areas that I know is going to look very different once the school year begins. Okay, and we have, of course, the information on other general expenses, and again, the increase being slight, but
Okay,
even
just
though
stay
the
with
percentage
the
looks large,
and then
it's
it's
50% up. You can see the footnote that this is also has to do with our
Maybe this,
contracts on our academic software,
No.
our IT contract with the folks over at Data Hall down in Canton, Connecticut.
Yeah.
Our Power School consultant is in here, and our security monitoring system that we have with Stanley. And of course, legal expenses. Our legal expenses are all in the same category that you see in front of you.
I know.
And student athletics, a slight increase. And of course, we wonder about what's going to happen with athletics, you know, in schools that are opening up around the world. At this particular point, there's no gym. There's no
Just stay there.
competitive sports
Just stay there.
because
I
of
will
the
call.
fact that it's a large gathering of people. So this is an area, again, where there's
It is out. I don't-
unsureness about what's going to be coming up in the coming year.
It is. It's trying to stream. But if YouTube is out,
Facilities
it
improvements,
can't.
basically we're
Right,
in the
just
midst
stand
of a
by.
capital
Go eat your supper.
planning phase, which will
Okay.
take over
Bye.
probably 5 years, maybe 7 years, not to complete. But we do have in here some areas that need immediate address. And so it's a large figure of $277,100. As I mentioned earlier, the school court voted to take $100,000 out of its sinking fund to bring this number down. So it is reduced, if you will, by the school corp investing its sinking fund into this. But it does have to do with a hot water tank,
on.
which actually
YouTube
is
is
still
on.
springing leaks
Gone.
at this
'Cause they
particular
can't get it
point.
either.
Well, this is, YouTube is down.
And we're probably gonna have to
I
address
searched
that a
it.
lot sooner.
I only could see the YouTube.
And of course, the issue of the roofs, the roofing projects, as we have major need for roofing at the school, and it does mention that in the footnote. about the replacement of at least 2 roofs. And as we continue down the road of examining these roofs, we're understanding that one of the roofs in particular is extremely bad, and we're going to need to really address the fact that even the cement itself has become somewhat porous. And then you have your overall look at the budget, once again making up 100% of that figure of $7,810,153, and then a pie chart which closes this particular show, as we do have a pie chart that shows what this looks like. Again, you can see the largest area of it is salaries and benefits, and the other areas are extremely small in percentage, but the division of them are here in the slideshow. Okay, I'm going to press escape. That'll make my screen shrink. Or maybe I should just leave it like it is. I don't know. Well, we're back now. I mean, I can share it again if needed.
Okay, I'm gonna.
I didn't stop sharing, so it should be still a
No,
share.
we're good. We're good.
We're okay? Good.
But I do want to announce that the live stream went down because YouTube is out in general. It is not us. We did not stop the YouTube stream. The YouTube is out. I hear somebody in the background. Who is that? I guess we have to mute everybody, Pam, if you can. Or I will. Let me go and mute you all up. Because we got background noises. Yeah. All right, so we'll be moving on to Melanie's presentation. And Melanie, do you want to do the screen share?
Certainly.
That way it'd be easier for you to control it.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, good evening. First, I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to present this budget in public. I want to thank our board members for their support and their contribution to the budget, along with our school administrators and central office staff. This budget truly represents a collaborative effort between the Gilbert School and Winchester Public Schools. I can say that that's the first time that's happened, I know during my tenure here, so I'm pleased with the process that's taken place. These are the board members and the contributors to this particular budget. So for us right now, I'll start with the fact that I really feel this budget represents a responsible, innovative, and collaborative approach to ensure that our movement to mastery. You've heard me say this every single year. I'm not about throwing new things at the wall and seeing if they stick. What we're about is picking out what's working in education and becoming masters at that. So that is what this budget represents, is our continued movement to become masterful at this. We will focus on our curriculum, assessment, professional development, and building infrastructure to support our students and staff learning and also their environmental health. Additionally, it represents an increase that was carefully and thoughtfully developed. We've paid very close attention to ensure that we've spent this money usefully and have looked at shared resources when available and appropriate. You can see our budget calendar here. This budget calendar, we've had multiple meetings starting way back in the beginning of November to, right up to right now, we've been dealing with different iterations of this budget. So please know that much time and effort has gone into the development of this particular budget. In an effort to ensure that we are consolidating with the town of Winchester and we are working towards saving money on both sides of the fence, these are some of the areas that we are currently collaborating around: fuel for vehicles, weather issues, state reimbursements, grounds for fields, crossing guards, insurance, risk management, recreational facility sharing, building committees, some attorney issues, fire inspections, road work around schools, and security and safety issues. Additionally, under the finance and human resources aspects, we are working together on the town pension for non-certified employees, workers' compensation, unemployment, payroll, and health, dental, and life insurance. I think it's always important to remind you, when you invest in education, you should be getting a return on your investment. So I know this slide is a bit small. I'm going to see if I can blow it up just a hair for you here.
Yeah,
What
could
I
you,
want you to notice,
Melanie, some people are saying that they can't see things because you're in a Word document. If you could
Yep.
try to extend it out a little bit more, that might be helpful.
how's that?
Isn't delayed.
Candy, does that work?
Well, I mean, I can see it
About
here.
the
I don't know if
biggest
you
I
can
can
see
get
it
it.
at home, and I don't know if other people on the, You-
Also online, so if they
So-
need to be able to view it in a different capacity, they could pull it up on their own device.
right, so if anybody's online watching Zoom, you could go to this through the Board of Education link.
It's under our finance tab. So basically what this slide shows is that we are at 79.3 according to our most recent ESSA scores, and this is every child succeeds, every student succeeds. And the state of Connecticut is at 74.2. We are now outperforming the state by 5 percentage points in here. Again, if you look historically, our trend data here for our targets that the State Department of Ed sets, we are between 5 and 7 years ahead of target with our academic performance indicators based upon where the state wanted us to be. And this is just a graphical representation that you can see we are the blue line, and you can see where that blue line is going based upon our overall district performance, bachelor's performance, and Pearson's performance. So we will continue our efforts to focus on our science instruction coming up, specifically using a program called Open SciEd that will help us to be able to match the next generation science standards and perform well in that assessment. The curricular materials, the nice thing about this program, are free. We just have to get the manipulatives. However, the professional development that goes along with it, so teachers become fluent in the instruction of it, is pricey, but definitely worth it. We will continue our Better Lessons mathematics work. We used to have a math coach, but in order to save money, we had switched over to doing Better Lessons. So we will continue our work around Better Lessons to have that be a cost savings, but also, a strong support to our teachers. We will be continuing our work around peer walkthroughs. We began this process that principals did with their staff this past spring, and we will continue showcasing that so that there's colleague-to-colleague work happening and analysis of instruction in the classroom. And our large endeavor for this upcoming school year will be what's called close reading. And this helps students with skills and strategies necessary to comprehend challenging text. It's always easier for students to be able to understand a text that's at their level, but sometimes we really need to push that nonfiction and fiction text so that way they can understand text that might be a bit above their level. So this will be a year-long professional development that will focus on how we are teaching students to tear apart reading. Facilities, if you've been by our facilities, I will tell you that there's drastic changes, specifically with Pearson. That's been our focus right now. There are two things that we've been able to cross off this list. So we did, as you can see, put the 8-person swing set in already at Pearson. So we're able to take that off the list. And our maintenance staff, given the fact that we have the school closure time, was able to replace the sink, the floor tile, the wall tile, and the toilet in the Pearson staff bathroom. So the only remaining improvement that we're looking for outside of our routine maintenance will be
YouTube,
the
the
upgrade of
company
the
went
first
down.
floor student bathrooms at the
You
Pearson.
kidding me?
But it's back up.
Okay.
This basically just shows you our
It's back
class
up.
size ratio. So we do have a union contract that says that, in pre-K and K, we'll have about 18 kids in a class. In grade 1 and 2, 20, and we will not exceed 24 students in a classroom in pre-K.
It's not your, YouTube's not
If
your
we do
fault.
go over
Well,
these,
it is, 'cause as
basically
soon
what
as
it
I left the building,
means
it went out.
is that we will have to pay an overage to those teachers for going above those. I will remind you right now, though, that these ratio numbers do not include the new students that we will be getting from St. Anthony's. So I will tell you right now, these are definitely underestimations of where we should be at for next year. So that just leads us to a quick slide that kind of shows, you know, the Board of Education has not asked, and I'm talking specifically about the appropriated budget, has not asked for increases over the course of years. So I just want to put that out there that, you know, we've done a lot with a little. And as Dr. Serio had talked about, next year, I think we're going to need to do a lot, probably a lot more. This just shows you the responsibility behind the salaries. Salaries always drive your budgets. So we did this as a first time this year to show that when we are giving salary increases, we are super conservative with what we are giving in terms of salary increases. You can see that this chart dates in some cases back to 2012, 2013. And, you know, the range of increases has been, you know, relatively minimal. So we did include in our presentation, you know, a lot of times you see when you get to our grant section, you'll see, you know, an adult ed grant, an alliance grant. So there's a definition of what all these grants are for now in this presentation and what they can be used for. So I'm just going to skip through that. That's something that you can go over at your own leisure. Talking about what we bring in, our revenue. So we have a grant called the ECS grant. That's an Education Cost Sharing Grant. We are anticipating that we will be getting $7.8 million as part of our ECS grant that comes into us. Revenue to the Board of Education, we are looking right now at, for this upcoming school year, at $1.9 million. That does represent a decrease. And I will tell you that the decrease largely comes from us being in our 5th year of the Commissioners Network grant. Tomorrow, I will be going before the State Board of Education with our 2 principals seeking our 5th year extension. So this will be the last year that we will be eligible for any Commissioners Network money. So just to let you know, the money that was in Commissioners this year was $1.3 million. We are anticipating a 50% cut to that, which is going to be around $685,000. That number next year will go to 0. So the other piece of the puzzle that came down, because our Director of Student Services is doing a really good job with special education students, we are anticipating that our ECS funding will decrease next year. So overall, we are looking at a decreased amount of revenue coming into the overall Board of Education. Moving on to our federal dollars, we are expecting a slight increase of around $3,000 there. And then our overall revenue here, you can see, is $10.5 million here. And we are seeing about an $851,000 decrease from this year to next. This is a graphical view of what we just spoke about, where the funds come from. And then this takes us to our appropriated budget. So I will walk you through with this. In terms of our wages, we are expecting a decrease of a little less than 1%. We are seeing an increase, obviously, in our benefits, as Dr. Serio had talked about. So in wages and benefits, we are expecting an increase of about $122,000, which represents a 1.43% increase. Our big thing on property services, we had to take some money out of there to make sure that we were able to get our budget to a place that we felt was responsible. Our pupil transportation is going up slightly. We are anticipating an out-of-district tuition bill decrease of around $178,000. I want to explain the Gilbert tuition line because it does differ a little bit from what Dr. Serio had said, but I will explain why it looks that way. So when you look at just the appropriated budget last year, the amount funded that was less than 4.91 because we were only looking at the appropriated budget. We ended up taking out an additional $100,000 out of our non-lapsing fund to be able to meet the costs of what we were looking at for tuition payment to not increase taxes last year. So overall for us, when you look at the non-lapsing fund, in addition to the proposed appropriated fund amount, it is $336,000 difference from last year. Nonetheless, again, I will say that the amount that is increased this year was collaboratively developed, and that happened together. So I understand. I just wanted to explain the $100,000 and where that came from. And then you can see that we've had relatively small decreases in other lines here. Our dues and equipment, our dues line did go up a bit. So if you look at the overall increase, it is a 1.2% increase we're asking for and seeking, which represents a $240,000 increase in our budget. Our enrollment, if you look at it, will be, as a district, when we look at pre-K to 12, the highest it's been in a while. So we are, again, not including right now the number of St. Anthony students that will be coming in. I can tell you just this past week, Winchester alone received 8 students from Bristol. So these numbers are definitely an underestimation of where our numbers will be for next year. If you talk about personnel in our district right now, there is a swap in here, which I think is a really important swap to talk about. You will see that I am seeking an additional administrator, and I'm doing that because we are losing Ruth Ann Horvey to retirement in our FRC. The grant that we hold under school readiness requires that the person hold either an 092, which is a principal's license, or an early childhood background in a master's degree. So I know that we need more administrative assistance at bachelor's, specifically around teacher evaluation and student behavior, to be able to assist with that. So what I've done is as you can see, I'm not replacing the specific position in the FRC. It will be a jointly shared position between the FRC and school administration. It will be a split position to be able to do cost savings, because if I had to put in the budget for both an assistant principal and replacing Ms. Horvey, the cost for that just in salary alone would have been around $185,000. So I just want to let you know that that right there enables us to keep that around $100,000. But again, that has been absorbed. So the overall impact in our budget when it comes to the ebbing and flowing of taking in and taking out will only be an increase of staffing by 0.7 FTE. And this is a further breakdown of what that looks like. So when you heard me talk about out-of-district placements, this kind of gives you an idea of what that is going to look like. So right now for our out-of-district placements, we are really looking at decreasing our out-of-district placements by about $188,000. That is being achieved by, as you can see, a decrease in student numbers. However, when we get a decrease in student numbers, that also leads to a decrease in excess cost grant at 70% funding. So the less money we're putting out, the less money we bring in on that grant. So, you know, it does ebb and flow. But overall, you will see that the net cost regarding out-of-district tuition placements are going down. And then this chart here simply kind of lays out for you what our proposed and appropriated budget looks like. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Tony. We are back in regular Zoom view. YouTube is back up, by the way, so if anybody was live streaming or worried about it, it is back up. So that is good. So now we're moving on to the comment portion. So as I said at the beginning of the meeting, we will take public comment. It will be 5 minutes for the first round, 3 minutes for each successive round. But first we will start with the If the Board of Selectmen has any comments now, or if you'd like to wait, then I would go to the Board of Education and the Gilbert School, and then we'll go to the public. So does anybody from the board want to ask any questions right now? Board of Selectmen? Candace?
My question is to Dr. Serio regarding the capital improvements. Does our contract for education include capital improvements?
Yes, it does. It's actually it's called a triple net lease that the school corp has. They rent the building from the trust for $1 per year. And in that triple net lease, the maintenance of the building, including these capital improvements, is an anticipation of said lease. So it's not a contract between the WBOE and the school corp. It's actually a contract that does exist, a lease, I should say, a lease that exists that has that capital improvement component in it.
I've never seen the budget that included capital improvements before. Is that true? Is this the first time we're seeing capital improvements in your budget?
We've had other capital improvements over the years, but I think the roofs in particular make this stand out a little bit greater than you normally see.
So if I lease a space in a building that's owned by someone else, usually those capital improvements, I don't understand the term, are borne by the owner of the property, not the tenant. So is there a percentage or something? Is there a sharing of those expenses, or all of those expenses borne by the Winstead voters?
It's actually the expenses are the responsibility of the school corp, which of course includes the Winchester members. I'm thinking back in time, during my time anyways, when we did our boilers. The boilers had to be replaced. The boilers were replaced. There was a combination of the use of our capital sinking fund, as well as monies that were loaned to the school corp by the trust. Now this goes back to, I think, my second year, I think, on the job. So there is a history of this capital improvements taking place. Those boilers were about a $600,000 project.
Thank you.
I just have a follow-up on that. Tony, a few years ago at a budget hearing, you said that we weren't paying for capital funds. I remember that distinctly because I had budgets from the early 2000s that said we were. But what role does the trust have? Because, if you look at the probate documents, the trust does have funding within their probate, the probate document that you read, there is funding within, or money within the trust, but then the trust, because I guess when we go through contracts and we look at how things happen, we have the students and most of the funding, and the school corporation has the building. And the other thing that happens with that is with this lease is now that not only are we taking care of town buildings, but now we're taking care of your building as well.
Well, I'm not sure if we even had capital. I can't recall the conversation from years ago. Not sure if we even had a capital expenditure in that particular budget in that particular year. So I can't go back in time, but in fact, I can address the other piece on what is the responsibility of the trust. The trust is responsible for all the land around the building. For example, we have had, and it's unfortunate, but we have had breaches in the retaining wall. The old retaining wall that goes back about I would say it probably goes back 150 years or so. It would go back to when the home, the Gilbert home, was on top of that hill. Now that has had several breaches over the years, and those have been fixed by the trust. We have a breach right now. Quite frankly, I think most people know our circle is not open. That's the bus circle. We are using a different configuration for buses, but that is something that we have not been able to address at this particular time. It's quite an expensive project to fix the breach and also recreate a new circle, and it would be a new circle.
Anyone else have any questions along that line? Linda?
Now along that line, I just wanted to ask Dr. Serio what the role of the resource officer will be.
The resource officer would have been a security guard, but we would have ended up using that person in other ways, including establishment of relationships with students, helping to maybe, not maybe, but help teach classes, quite frankly, on the issues that are often associated that students don't seem to realize in regard to, for example, it would affect their students, hosting laws, issues that are associated with use of cell phones in ways that are not appropriate, because that does occur, and helping students understand their interactions and the antecedents that would result in a behavior in that interaction, and consequences that they could face because of said interaction. So it's far more than just being a security guard. It's really having a relationship with another person that students can go to and can act as a in my experience, and I did have 2 of these in Billerica when I was there. They act a lot like social workers. They do. They actually do act a lot like social workers in their outreach to students.
Thank you.
Todd? Todd? Oh, I'm muted, so I can't do it.
So, Dr. Serio, you said your budget does not account for COVID.
That's
Are you
correct.
Are you working on one that does?
I'm addressing it. I am addressing it. That particular, but that's a particular area still being developed at this particular time. I did see that Kurt Moffat did a great article on Thomaston and the superintendent down there reaching out to the state and the enormous amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars that were anticipated. I was on a call today with the commissioner, and there was an estimate that to protect people, PPE, it's like a $300 million price tag for the number of students who exist who go to school here in the state. So no, it's not in there, and it's something we're going to have to address, and it probably will affect different parts of this budget in different ways. And I'm sure it's going to affect Melanie's budget too, because the WBOE is going to have these same impacts, coupled with whatever way we're going to use transportation and trying to establish social distancing on a bus, which means maybe more bus runs and more buses.
And Mel, what about you? Does your budget take anything into account, or?
This budget was developed pre-COVID. I think it's important to recognize that, there are some funds that are coming to the district regarding that. The CARES funds will come in. The CARES funds between Gilbert and Winchester Public Schools will be $191,000. Do I think that's going to cover everything? Because Gilbert's going to get a portion of that. WPS is going to get a portion of that. No, I don't. So there will be definitely some figures that are going to need to be adjusted going forward regarding this. I think for me, one of the more expensive components of what's going to happen going forward not only is, you know, the PPP and sanitation work that will need to happen in the schools on a daily basis, but more importantly, I think, is the recovery efforts that are going to need to take place to be able to close the learning gaps for students.
Absolutely.
So unfortunately, I wish I could give you a price tag right now of what that's going to be, but I think I might be a millionaire if I was able to give you that price tag right now. So
Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up to that, Tony, you guys applied for a PPP program on top of the CARES program, and you applied for $923,000 of a forgivable loan. Is that something that you've been awarded already?
Yes, we were eligible and we did apply, and we did vote to sign the promissory note. We're going to be tracking, of course, those funds, and we're going to use them in accordance with the law. And of course, that means 75% of it has to be used on payroll. It would be, of course, something that at this particular point, we could also use it on utilities. And payroll alone in the coming weeks will be $820,000. We feel that we can meet the criteria, and we will do our due diligence to make the monies traceable, so that in fact we do have this opportunity to have it be a forgiven loan, therefore it becomes a grant.
All right, so then what happens to the tuition that the taxpayers are giving you right now?
So what will end up happening with that is we will reserve those funds. We will put them in reserve to help offset the kinds of expenses we're talking about for next year. That includes personnel, because I do believe we will probably need tutors to help certain kids catch up, but also the monies that are going to be needed in order to be proactive and reactive to the fact that we have to do the sanitization to keep everybody safe, including the purchase of PPE. So there's things that we know we're going to be needing to address, in addition to, of course, any kind of budgetary shortfalls or deficits that might occur.
Yeah, I can understand the COVID issue, and I can understand the funds being expended on that. But if we went over to the WPS side, the Board of Education budget, and let's say that they got a grant and they paid all their grant money towards their salaries, and they had $500,000 left at the end of this year, that would have to come back into the town's general fund, because the general fund and property taxes funded the money that went to the Board of Education. So in the money from the taxpayers that goes to the Board of Education, part of those taxes pay for the tuition to the Gilbert School, to pay for the functioning of the Gilbert School in fiscal year 2019-20. So you're going to reserve those, and that's one of the parts of the financial structure that I will talk about a little bit later tonight as well. Part of the financial structure is that when you have money at the end of the school year, unlike the public schools, you keep that money. You don't send it back to the town.
That's right. We do have a reserve, and that reserve is used at different times, sometimes for capital projects. I think this coming year it's going to be used for any deficits that will occur in the project that in the budget, any deficits that do occur in the budget that would be COVID related and very proactive and reactive moves on our part to make sure that building is safe for the kids, and that we're able to address what I believe will end up being blended education.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask my next question. On July 1st of 2019, which was last year, the Board of Education was anticipating an agreed upon amount of money for the tuition line. The Board of Selectmen last year at this budget hearing, during the budget, we put some extra money into the support for education the K-6 system put money in for an increase for the Gilbert School. However, on July 1st, 2019, when WPS got the bill from the Gilbert School, it was $100,000 more that was not approved by the Board of Education, wasn't approved by the Board of Selectmen, and it was taxpayer money that had to be shifted to you because of the state law that you used, and you had used back in 1990 as well. Could you tell me and the taxpayers why they had no say whatsoever in you demanding the extra $100,000 for this current school year?
Well, that had to do with the breakdown in contract negotiations. We did have a plan. Melanie and I agreed to it. We shared in a particular deficit at a certain amount each. My brain is focusing in on, I think it was 74,000 by Mel and 75,000 by us. And the reality is that the negotiations broke down. The agreement became null and void. We went back to our budget position and our tuition position that we had prior to Mel and I coming up with the agreement, and prior to the breakdown in the contract. That the case, the law, of course, that you're talking about is a statute. I believe the statute numbers are 10-33 and 10-34, which do allow the independent town academies to set their tuition. And yes, we did use the statutes that are clearly addressed, that independent school can indeed set its own tuition and send the bill.
Right, so back in 2017, when there were changes that were going to happen at the state legislature, Gilbert had a lobbyist there. Was that a trust lobbyist or a school corporation lobbyist?
No, that would have been a trust lobbyist.
Okay, so there's a state law that allows you to just set the tuition and demand of taxpayers amounts of money that we have no say over.
Correct, that's true.
Would anyone else like to? Candace?
Tony, can you explain to me how everyone's operating with student athletics now in COVID? How is that being handled? Do we have teachers that are literally, I mean, you say that the cost, you're anticipating the cost to go up 5.81% for student athletics. So what happens for this year's, is there a potential savings or a unexpended amount for student athletic, your line item for $132,000?
Thank you for asking that. I mean, there is some savings that we realize due to we won't be using the transportation for sports. Obviously, we're not hiring referees, umpires, things of that nature. So there are some savings in that area. We also know that we're in negotiations regarding payment to coaches at this particular time. We know that coaches are not, working, if you will, with their group of students, but there might be some coaches who are doing some virtual training with their students, or maybe did some preseason training with their students. All of this is being taken into consideration when we take a look at the stipends that coaches are paid. They might be paid a proportion of those particular things, but the sports will not be running this year. In fact, schools that have gone back in other nations have suspended things like gymnasium. They have suspended sports. There's some talk that maybe there could be some social distancing that could occur with baseball and softball, but I think it'll be experimental if it does at all occur. And it probably will start at the recreational level before it'll happen in the schools. Quite frankly, I'm very concerned about sports for the coming autumn season. the fall season. I think at this particular time, it might be doubtful that we have sports.
How do we see those post-COVID potential savings? So you're saying you're going to, reserve them, but how do we see those reserves? How are we going to see an analysis of your budget post, this year, and where those are going to go in? How do we allocate those funds to the next year, or can we? You put them in reserves. I don't know how to. How are we going to identify those savings?
Thank you for asking the question. In fact, it was part of a conversation with Finance Committee today. We're going to be very careful with these funds. We're not going to be spending these funds without going back to the school corp and talking about what the expenditures would be for. So if it turns out that I have to hire 5 tutors, well then we'll be talking about that at school corp. The funds will be held in a separate account, the PPP monies, and used for payroll. As we mentioned, then they will build up a reserve. But the reserve will have to be spent based upon the needs of the school, which I will address with the Finance Committee and then the school corp. So there will be a written record of how these particular reserve funds are used to keep the school operating. Right away, I think again about the issues associated with keeping the school sanitized so that our students and our faculty are safe, whether that's PPE or sanitization stations. I anticipate that both of them are going to be quite costly.
I agree, but I also want to know if there's a way for us to see, based upon the budget you presented to us, where those savings are coming from, and then put in reserve. So it's also to identify the savings, and then obviously you put them in reserve. What is that amount going to be, just not going into reserve?
Yeah, I don't.
Sort of tracking.
Yeah, I wish I had a number for you tonight. I mean, outside of the fact I know I'm probably saving about 20,000.
I'm not looking for a number.
Uh-oh.
I'm saying I'm not looking for
I want to know the process.
So an analysis afterwards at the year end, here's the unexpended amount, and these are the areas because of COVID. And
Yes.
then to keep that and share that with the residents, and then say, okay, this is how we anticipate to use it. I think it's an abnormal environment we're in, but I think it helps with transparency.
I agree with you, Candace. I think we do have to be transparent about this, and I've been addressing the PPP and going for the PPP, explaining how it's going to help us this year to help us to start the school next year. We, at the end of the year, of course, will find that there may be a certain amount of monies that can be moved into our reserves. We'll do 2 things. One is we can do it based on where we found natural savings, maybe because of COVID, maybe not because of COVID, maybe because of the fact we were stringent in our spending, more austere in our approach regarding expenditures. That happens. It happens on a yearly basis. So we can make that traceable. We can make that traceable, just like we can make sure that the funds that are in reserve, because we're using our PP money this year, the funds that go into the reserve, that we really do address with School Corp how they'll be expended in the coming year, if expended at all. I mean, I hope for the best, quite frankly, but whatever we don't use of the PPP money, or if there's a cash in the reserve that can go to pay back to the federal government, we'll do that. We'll do that.
Thank you.
Before I move on to people, I just want to, if you only have your name up, we cannot see if you want to make a comment. So I keep flipping back and forth between these screens because I'm on 2 different screens here. so I can't see you if you raise your hand.
Jack raised his hand.
Thank you.
Just so you know, I can see Jack. I'm on a grid view, so I can see everybody.
I could see Jack too.
Oh, great.
Okay, Jack, go ahead.
I have two questions. First one I'm going to ask to Tony, and then the second one to Melanie. Tony, you anticipate $480,774 from 30 international students. Is that a guaranteed amount? Trust guaranteeing that kind of added income?
You know, that, Jack, I'm going to tell you is that is not I won't use the word estimate. It is a projection. It is a projection. The trust has, I'm hoping we get the 18 kids plus the 2 new ones that want to come to us, the 18 returners, so that we'll have 20. But the trust would be down 10 students, and that represents $160,000. So at this particular point, it's a projection, but it could be that if no one comes because they can't get back in this country, we might not be realizing the $480,000 from the trust, and that would create a deficit situation in my budget.
And creating a deficit situation in your budget, where would you turn to?
Well,
cover the cost of that.
Well, when we think about maybe what the personnel needs are going to be, it might be the reserve funds, but I would do that cautiously. And the reason why I say cautiously is because what I don't want to do is build a fiscal cliff. I don't know, but I think everybody on the screen here probably was involved in education to some degree, or at least I would hope, in 2008. Well, Jack, I got to tell you, when we had the stimulus packages come out from the federal government, the Obama administration, and I was in Bill Ricker at the time, I remember we moved very carefully with those funds so that we would not build ourselves a fiscal cliff where we would get to that year when those stimulus funds to rescue the schools would run out, and then we would have to lay off a whole bunch of people. So we moved very cautiously with those funds, and I'll be moving very cautiously with these funds for the same reason. Don't want to build a fiscal cliff.
I recognize that. I'm just concerned that if you're building an educational program anticipating $480,000 and you get even a third of that, there is some deficit changes, and you're going to have to make some changes within your expenditures. That could be staff reduction. It could be other changes within the fiscal plan.
Right. Well, you're right. It could be any of those, and of course, I would be very concerned really about reduction in staff. I mean, previous to COVID, there was one point, I think everybody in the public knows this, when Gilbert was asked to reduce its tuition by $347,000. That immediately got me thinking about mid-year staff reductions. And, you know, I'm looking at the situation with COVID and the effects it could have on enrollment, and I'm thinking about reductions. But I think it's at a time when kids are going to need probably more teachers, not less teachers. And if I'm doing distancing, social distancing in a classroom, I'm probably going to need more staff, and then the staff to help the kids catch up. So it's not the time to be thinking about reductions in staffing. There's just too much that we're going to encounter. The challenge is huge coming into this next year.
Well, I think we're all going to be challenged by
Absolutely,
by that.
Jack, it's everybody.
But taxpayers are challenged also, and we, sitting as the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, have to be aware of that. And your needs, as well as Melanie's needs, as well as the town needs, all have to be considered in how much can we actually afford. And yeah, some things are going to have to be hurt by reductions, and I think we need to be aware of that. You are, and Melanie is, I think the town is. But if the anticipation is almost another $500,000 in a way that's not going to come in, we're talking about some sizable reductions here.
We are, and you know, I've been around this town for 9 years now, so I know I'm not going to be able to bring you a $480,000 bill to make up that that tuition deficit if it ever does occur. You know, this is another reason for being eligible for PPP that I went after the PPP money. And my economic indicators, especially around the possibility of a tuition shortfall causing a deficit in the budget, was one of the driving factors. Besides the expense of opening up school, a blended school.
Fair enough. Melanie, the question I have to you is more something that we've been talking about in the Finance Committee, was that we must have had some kind, or you must have had some kind of less cost of running the schools, the heating, electricity, whatever was reduced over the last 2 months and will continue through the end of the fiscal year. Do you anticipate being able to use some of that savings to buy supplies ahead of time that are already in your budget? Can you do something with the amount of money that you are not spending because of the schools being closed in anticipation of being able to buy things that would have been within the 2021 budget, and therefore maybe making some reductions in that budget?
So, yes, absolutely, Jack. So one of the key things that we've been able to reduce in our budget as a cost-saving measure was $88,000 for transportation. So I renegotiated our transportation contract based upon the fact that, you know, obviously school closed right around the middle of March, and we were not providing bus service for the remainder of the school year. The executive order had come out, I believe it was Executive Order R, stating that with school bus contracts, you could renegotiate, but with unemployment at such a high rate, you could renegotiate so that basically we were just paying the wages and benefits of the drivers so that they were not unemployed and they were remaining healthy and whole on their wage. So that is what we did, and $88,000 was the cost effect of that. So as you know, PPP is one of the things that it's a high demand item right now. So there are certain vendors right now that are putting out information and have equipment available. So I have been actively every single day, Nancy, our finance director, gets an email and said, Nancy, I spent this because I was able to get 200 masks today. You know, there was 2 bottles of sanitizer available. I bought 2 bottles of sanitizer. So I am actively kind of preparing for upcoming school year by trying to expend some of that money and some of the needs that I know we're going to have now versus later.
So I'm assuming at that point from what you just said, you're not anticipating having any money left over at the end of your budget.
I am going to anticipate that I will have some additional funds left over at the end of the school year that I will be able to roll over into the non-lapsing fund for usage against next year. Yes, I am anticipating that.
Okay, and in the expenses that you see going forward, even as Dr. Serio has said, do you see those expenses increasing because of class sizing changes, things that we should be more aware of?
So on my end, I will tell you the 2 things that I think are going to be cost drivers for Winchester Public Schools as an organization. So we pay for busing, whether you're at Winchester Public Schools or whether you're at the Gilbert School. The busing contract is held with the local town. So Gilbert does not pay anything for their regular busing on a daily basis. Winchester absorbs all of that. So should Winchester and Gilbert need to add additional runs, just to give you an idea, a run for to and from school on a daily basis is right around $300 a day for one additional run. So if you times that by multiple runs on several days, you could see where I'm going with cost just with busing alone. And I'm giving you very, ballpark figures, but very real figures also. The other piece of the puzzle is around what I spoke about earlier, which is recovery instruction. At no point in probably any of our lifetimes has any of us ever not been in school as a primary or high school age student for 6 consecutive months. When you miss a half a year of instruction, particularly, with primary age students, you're talking about lack of routines, you're talking about lack of structure, you're talking about lack of instruction, and if you think starting school is bad after a month and a half of summer break, try bringing them back after 6 months of a break to where there has not been the same level of intense structure every single day that they receive at school. So definitely there will be a need and a demand from parents, I am certain, for additional recovery services so that children can begin to close those gaps that have undoubtedly developed.
Are you in a process right now, or the school, is there any way that you are following through on a daily or weekly basis with how many students are actually getting online and how long they're online and the quality of the instructions that they're getting? Is there any way of you're measuring that?
We are measuring it on a weekly basis. So right now, 90% of our students are actively engaged in online learning. I will tell you though that no way, shape, or form is distance learning as quality as when you put a person in front of a child to be able to work with them. You just can't supplement that with a computer. So we have a high level of engagement, but the thing is, when you look at the pacing and the layout of our instruction when we're in school and when we have kids in front of us, we move at a quick pace. But when you're reliant on, families having work schedules, not everybody's home during the day, it's having to self-teach how to use the computer, how to self-understand these concepts, and then, they're Zooming or meeting with their teachers every once in a while, but it doesn't move at the same pace by any means as what it would have moved should they have been in school. So we are definitely going to not complete all of our units of study that we would have done traditionally. We're going to have to backfill those units of study, prioritize the standards of instruction going forward, and be able to get back on track. So we have a lot of work ahead of us.
Thank you. Thank you both for answering the questions. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Candace?
Melanie, I was wondering how many students you think you'll be getting from St. Anthony's? And you also mentioned you got 8 from Bristol. I didn't understand that. So we watch literally on a daily basis how our enrollment ebbs and flows. And you guys have heard me say that, while a lot of our local towns surrounding us are seeing decreases in our enrollment, we're actually on an upswing with our enrollment. Apparently the model of if you build it, they will come is working for us. So we just received a family of 8 that has moved from Bristol into Winchester Public Schools, and they'll be starting online learning with us. In addition to that, we have probably right now, I want to say off the top of my head, between, I would say, about 15 students coming to us from St. Anthony's. There were, including middle school, so this just isn't talking about elementary students, there were 48 students that were at St. Anthony's that would be Winchester Public Schools eligible or Gilbert eligible next year. So there's the potentiality of, between Gilbert and us, 48 students. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm looking for other hands at the moment. All right, I'll open up to more. Anybody else? Any other comments by anyone? Cheryl?
Yeah.
You have to unmute yourself, or I'll unmute you.
Okay. I have a question for Tony. A couple things, Tony. The capital fund that you've commented on, isn't that funded by the Winchester tuition that is not used at the end of each year?
That is correct. We call it a sinking fund.
Okay, you call it a sinking fund. So why don't you use all of that towards their capital improvements instead of adding into as a budget for this year additional expenses for us?
It wouldn't be prudent to exhaust that particular fund in case there is an emergency situation. I'm thinking about that hot water heater right now.
And
We were able to nurse it through, but there's an emergency that could have been taken place, and we don't have a large enough contingency in order to take care of it. So that would have been something that would have had to been addressed.
Right, and in an emergency, you could turn to the trust whose property it is and who benefits financially and increasing value on any improvements on that property, correct?
I wouldn't turn to the trust because I have that triple net lease that basically says that the school corp does take care of all of the improvements that are to take place in the building, or maintenance that has to take place in the building, including that hot water heater.
Maintenance, but what about capital improvements? Wouldn't that be something that should be paid for the trust? Excuse me, I'm still talking.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be appropriate in order to, because it improves the quality and the value of the property of the trust, wouldn't it be more appropriate for the trust to pay for improvements to your property?
What I can address is the fact there's a triple net lease, and it was used at the time of, in my time, anyways, the most expensive thing that we addressed, of course, was the boilers.
Okay. You also talked about the PPP loan. Are you willing to commit that the Winchester taxpayers are not going to be responsible for paying back that loan in the event it is not forgivable?
I cannot comment on that, quite honestly. My goal is to spend the money appropriately to build a traceable, a visible and transparent, traceable field, if you will, line to those monies and their expenditures so that they are eligible for forgiveness.
However, Tony, isn't it true that you need to spend that money by July 30th or June 30th? And you're going to be getting our tuition payments during that whole time, which will cover your payroll requirements?
That is correct. And just so that you'll know, I attended a webinar.
I did too.
Yeah, this is, independent schools are doing this because you have the right to do economic forecasting, and the economic forecast is not favorable. So yes, the answer is yes. We are going to use the PPP money between now and June 30th. I wish it could be a little bit longer, but we'll use the PPP money. We will reserve the monies in the tuition to get ready for the start of next year. Whatever is not expended will return to the government.
But in that seminar, which I attended as well, they indicated that you had to look at what your other revenue sources were in order to determine whether you were eligible.
I did.
Did you disclose to the bank in applying for the loan that you had the Winchester tuition coming in on a regular basis that would cover your payroll during this time period?
We disclosed that we were going to use the money for payroll.
No, did you disclose your other revenue source, that being the Winchester Public School funds?
The application did not actually get into that. I knew from the government that I had to talk about other revenue sources, and also the forecasting that I had to do on why those revenue sources were a threat.
So my question was, did you disclose those revenue sources? You didn't answer that question now twice.
Well, that's because I don't have an answer for that question. Because
you didn't disclose it?
I'm telling you that I don't have an answer for that question.
Right.
I could research that, but I don't have an answer this evening.
Now, I also understand that at the finance committee, which I believe was today, or
Yes.
there was a raise awarded double the standard in the area for the non-certified staff. If we're concerned about funds and you're concerned about budget shortfalls, why would you give a raise that is double the area standard for non-certified staff?
Yeah, the 2.9% is what you're talking about. It is our tradition in Gilbert to honor our non-certified staff by providing them with the same salary increase that our teachers are getting. So that's 9%.
And that's magnanimous in regular times, but we're looking at serious budget shortfalls. You're looking at increased costs going forward. So sometimes you can't just honor people if you can't afford it. Do you agree with that concept?
I agree with honoring my people and using the traditions that we have held long before I ever got there in regard to the payment of the non-certified staff.
The problem we have, Tony, and this is all respect, but you have no accountability, nor do you seem to care to have any accountability towards the citizens of this community that are paying the bulk of the expenses for the school. You want to honor your traditions. You want to submit, bills that you feel are appropriate. When we had the negotiations last spring, not this past, the spring before that, we left the last session with an agreement on a tuition amount and an agreement on special ed. You guys reneged on that and then increased the tuition, which caused us to have to, the Board of Ed, to have to reduce what we could pay on behalf of the students that are not in your school, at least not this, special ed students. And that was done after the budget had been approved. And it wasn't what you were trying to explain before. I clearly remember it, and I'm sure, Doug could back me up on this. You added bill, and it's like you just have no accountability, and what you presented today indicates you feel that you have no accountability to the citizens of this community. You will not commit, one, that you will not hold the citizens of this community responsible for your PPE.
Now, once again, I'll point out that the PPP funds, we were eligible, we applied. I have vetted this through with accountants as well as with attorneys. I feel very comfortable that by using the trace that we're going to use on the funds and the use of the funds, will make this a forgivable loan.
Then why can't you commit to the citizens of Winchester that you would not, your school, the corp, will not ask the citizens of Winchester to pay that loan back if you are mistaken, if you receive bad advice and you are mistaken that it would be forgivable?
Bad advice. I guess, one has to look at it from this perspective. I know that I'm going to be facing a year when there are going to be major challenges to our budget. This was an opportunity to be prepared for those major challenges and the safety of our kids upon their return, and also to help them out academically. Those are the things I'm doing. I am basically taking a protective hedge and building it around us in case we do have a drop in enrollment, in case we do have a deficit in tuition that would then produce a deficit in my budget. These are what the funds are for. If I end up not having to use these funds, I'll return them to the government.
I think I've made my point. Nothing else.
All right, I'm looking for hands. Doug?
Am I unmuted?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank the Board of Selectmen for what's been a wonderful working relationship between the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen for the past few years. You folks have been great in terms of responding to our financial needs, and I think you've seen that it's paid dividends over the past couple of years. I think some of you might share our frustration that we do not have a control over a fairly big hunk of our budget, that being the Gilbert tuition fee, and that you might be tempted to think that you should reduce our budget by some amount to reflect reflect your unhappiness. And I can understand that. But you also have to understand that we are statutorily required to pay Gilbert tuition as it's billed. So that puts us in a very hard place. I'd also like to remind everybody that if there is a staggered learning or a double run, as Melanie described, that burden will fall entirely upon the Winchester Public School budget, and Gilbert will not share any part of that. So, looking ahead, I know that there's an enormous amount of uncertainty for all of us. And if I were in your shoes, I'd be thinking, oh my God, am I going to get all the tax revenue that we planned on? Because, yeah, that's a reality that people aren't going to pay their tax bills, and you're going to have to make some accommodations. And I could certainly understand if you'd be looking to all of your stakeholders to take some kind of a cut. But in our instance at the Board of Ed, I think you can understand that we're going to have some extraordinary needs in the coming months, and there will be costs associated with those. So when you consider our budget, I simply ask that you think about that, and you, as you have done in the past, just treat us fairly. So thank you very much.
Okay, I'm looking for other hands. Remember, if your name is just up, I can't see hands, so. Is there any other people? Any other comments? All right, I have some questions then. I made a list. So, somebody's got some noise on in the back, I don't know who, but anyway. So Tony and Melanie, if you can confirm these numbers for me. The Gilbert School is, their budget is 93.53% proportionately the share of the Winston taxpayer. Is that correct?
That is correct. It went up from 91, to 93.53, so went up 1.9.
So the Winston taxpayers carry 93.53% of the tuition at the Gilbert School, and you described your school as a nonprofit, non-public entity receiving 93.53% public money.
Yes, correct. We are a non-public, defined by the state of Connecticut as non-public, and we are also a non-profit.
So the $100,000 extra that you put in and the tuition bill last July 1st without anybody on the Board of Ed agreeing with that is actually double to 200 this year if you add in the 100 from last year and you put the 100 in this year. So your budget, as Melanie showed, is up $336,200 the tuition to the Winchester Public Schools and the Winston taxpayers.
Yeah, using the $100,000 as she mentioned, it does inflate with my particular budget increase, my tuition increase, because of the utilization of that 100,000, yes.
But it doesn't inflate it. It doesn't inflate your budget request. Your budget request last year, you inflated it. The Board of Education had no idea it was going to happen on July 1st. So your budget request to the taxpayers of this town that we would be approving is actually $200,000. The $100,000 from last July 1st, the $100,000 in this current budget, plus your increase. And that I have a major problem with that. And I've talked to Steve Sedlak about this, and I've talked to Steve about this for the past few months. That it really is upsetting to me that you and the board went this route this past July 1st, because it's unfair to the taxpayers to have a nonprofit, non-public entity increase their taxes. Because Melanie said something before, and I would have to agree with her. She said that she does a lot with a little. So let me confirm this as well. Melanie, the budget's going up. You had requested $240,000, was it, above last year's budget?
Yes.
And the increase of Gilbert tuition is 236 plus the 100, 336,000?
The 236, yes, because the 100,000 was from from this fiscal year.
Right, so where does the 100,000 come from for this fiscal year?
We have absorbed it into our budget.
So you've absorbed it. So if we didn't have increases from Gilbert in the past 2 years, your budget would actually have gone down.
Potentially.
because the Gilbert budget has gone up $704,393 in 2 years, or $1,572 per student over a 2-year period, while your budget and your monies outside of grants to us has not gone up.
One of the things that I would like to point out is that part of this increase that is taking place is recovery from the period of time that the receivers were here, and the receivers had placed a cap of $6,475,000, which we're still trying to recover from. So I just want to make sure we understand that. The other thing I want to make sure everybody understands is that negotiations broke down. Melanie and I did have an agreement last year, just like we have an agreement this year. Fortunately, this agreement is moving forward. But last year, because the negotiations broke down, that was the reason why we returned to our previous stance. We did have $150,000 or so difference, a delta to fill. As I mentioned, I believe Melanie's share of that was 74, my share of that was 75,000. So, you know, these negotiations that take place between superintendents are done in good faith. When negotiations broke down, unfortunately, we were not able to keep to the price of the budget that we had indicated and the resolution to that particular budget. But I am going back to take a look at the budgets all the way back to 2016-17. And I must say that we're still not up to the same levels that, you know, recovery completely from the receiverships and that $6,475,000 tuition cap.
How many less students do you have?
At this particular point, I believe we're going to be starting off with, 448 coming in, plus 149. We got the 30, and we'll have about 475, I hope.
Right, but over those years, since way back when, I'm looking for my sheet now, because I have like 1,000 of them on my desk right now. But I took and I went back through and I expanded Melanie's sheet about town expenditures. I went back and looked at it, and I have your tuition here too. I have all that. And during that time, we've also had a decrease in student population. We're down, at least within the district, since 2012, we're down 174 students within the district. So the receiver was here, the receiver's not here now. We're talking about Winstead taxpayer money.
Candy, can I just point out that the decrease in local students for WPS was largely due to the transition of 7th and 8th grade up to Gilbert?
Okay, well, that brings me to the next thing. In 2010, there was a vote to send the students from 7th and 8th grade up to the Gilbert School. At that time, there was supposed to be a finance committee. Has that finance committee been formed? And how is it that when there's a finance vote for Gilbert school tuition for 7th and 8th graders, specifically not high school tuition that's spoken to by the state statutes, but 7th and 8th graders, it's always a 5-4. It's always a +1 vote. Why is that? Where is that finance committee? Why is there not an even finance committee for 7th and 8th grade?
The Joint Finance Committee. The Joint Finance Committee comes together whenever there is a discrepancy, if you will, between the budget that's submitted and the budget that the Board of Education receives. So I can give you my brief history.
Is it a 5-4 board?
No, actually, it's a Joint Finance Committee. So they come to agreement. They actually come to a consensus on what they're going to do. So I can give you some history. The Board of Education owed the Gilbert School $288,000 when the 7th and 8th grade was moved up. The Winchester Board of Education did not pay that $288,000 in past tuitions. It was forgiven by the at that time the school court forgave the $288,000. My first year was then the year after.
Wasn't that the tuition stabilization fund? Wasn't that because you were counting per person at that time? There was a tuition stabilization fund.
It was a tuition stabilization fund. I believe that was the term that they gave that, and
because now you prorate everybody. Now you're prorating everybody. You're prorating the number of students, and you're not doing per person. You're prorating.
When you do mathematics, actually, it comes out to the same thing: prorated and per pupil. It actually comes out the same way. But just to go back in time again, my first year on the job, I walked into the job. It was the referendum hadn't passed yet. In fact, it wouldn't pass until I believe October in that first year that I was here. Make a long story short, I remember one of the first tasks I was given was to cut $361,000 from my budget so that we would be able to provide for the discrepancy between what the taxpayers ended up passing and what the Winchester Board of Education ended up putting into play. I remember the year after that, the Joint Finance Committee came together, and I remember walking, they went off into the room that's next to our library. I talked to our people. We ended up providing, we reduced our tuition by $150,000. So that Joint Finance Committee does come together, and it works successfully, and it worked successfully for the Winchester Board of Education over several years during that time frame.
Okay, so then I'll move into school lunch program. A few years ago, the Gilbert School decided to leave the federal free and reduced lunch school program to the tune of $100-something thousand. $131,000. That was then picked up, and students that bought lunch were paying that $131,000 back through it. However, there seems to be some debt associated with the school lunch program. Who is picking that up? Are taxpayers picking that up?
Well, what ends up, what we did last year is we did use some of the reserve, the sinking fund.
So that was taxpayer money.
And we also have gone back to the federal program. We are going back to the federal program. We tried to make our program work. We had one very good and successful year with it, but it has been a real struggle.
But again, the taxpayers of the town of Winchester, because of the decision not to participate in the federal funding, are now paying for the deficit that could have been covered by federal funding.
Yeah, it did come, we did take approximately $72,000 from the capital fund last year.
That could have been used for your roof that you're asking for this year. It's really, you know, I've spent a long time here, and I haven't always waded this deep into the issues, because it's always been the Board of Ed, I believe, that negotiate, and the Board of Ed comes forward with a number, and that's their representatives of the town. And I always thought of myself a little bit separately. I also, too, being a school administrator in the past, also saw my role a little bit different in terms of how deep into the school financial structure that I get. And I want to make sure that everybody knows this isn't about the Gilbert School faculty, the Gilbert School kids, the Gilbert School, how you do things. This is the financial structure that has been the underlying, I guess you call it the P and the Princess and the P, the underlying structure of negotiations, of the way that it is funded, the way that you have that state law, the way that you have you get to keep the money, taxpayer money, at the end of the year. And now what happened? Gave us a bill of $100,000 last year because the negotiations broke down, but you all spent 8 months in negotiations. Then I'm pretty sure the taxpayers paid for the lawyer for the Board of Ed and paid for the lawyer inside the tuition bill that we send to you, so taxpayers were arguing both sides of the issue. And then to come on top of that, we now have our tuition money that was in good faith by the taxpayers of this town given to the Board of Ed to pay the tuition for teacher salaries and student needs this year, only to find out that you're going to put it back into that reserve fund that we can't get back. And I find that fundamentally unfair to the community. I really do. I feel it fundamentally unfair to the community, the way that these taxpayer funds are moving around. Because the Board of Ed can't do anything. If Melanie runs into a problem and you give her another tuition bill, let's say July 1st, you find out PPP didn't work, you have all these expenses, there is no negotiation, you decide, and your board decides to give us another $100,000 or another $200,000. That comes from K-6 regular ed, because transportation can't be touched, special ed can't be touched. The only place it can come from is the pre-K to 6 classroom, unless the Board of Selectmen and the taxpayers give supplemental funds. We don't have a trust behind us.
One of the things that is getting lost in all of this is the PPP is our opportunity to actually take and have a hedge against the challenges that we're going to be facing next year, with the purposes, of course, taking care of the students, the secondary age students of the town of Winchester. We more than likely will not get any of the rescue packages, because they'll probably use one of the titles in order to pass those on, like the Every Student Success Act. The monies might filter through there. The independent town academies would not be getting those monies, just like we did not get any alliance money when Winchester became an alliance district. There was a huge amount of grant money. We have the same kids, we're educating the same kids, they're from the town, but we didn't get any of that money, and at some point along the way, I think it was as much as $2.1 million in that kind of money that was going to the town. I think that, I appreciate all the comments that are being made. Obviously, there's issues that do exist in the structure of independent schools, and some of our ability to have certain laws that are in our favor, just like the PPP. The PPP was in our favor to be able to go after those monies and to use future forecasting as a way to make receiving these funds acceptable, so that we could face challenges coming up, down the road. So, I can understand the frustrations, but I want to remind everyone that I don't think that we're going to be eligible for any of these rescue monies as they come out. Melanie mentioned the CARES Act. Well, it's based upon Title I. I think they're getting $185,000, I think is what she said. It's about 85% of what they normally get. But outside of the fact that I might be able to itemize monies that were directly related to COVID and our response to sanitizing the building, there's really not going to be anything else that would even be acceptable for CARES. But the PPP money is.
Well, Melanie did say that the $191,000 was going to be between Gilbert and WPS.
And that would be based upon any receipts that we would provide that probably would be directly related to the sanitization of the building.
Well, I would hope that if there's going to be, you're in need of funds, besides the fact that you're going to keep our tuition with the PPP money of $923,000 plus the other $100,000 possibly, that you would not be giving a bill to the WPS.
I can't, I can't respond to that.
Of course. Okay. All right. I see Cheryl's hand, then I'll call on Jack.
Just briefly, and I've got to correct, Tony, your statement. Negotiations did not break down. We came to an agreement on 2 points. We came to agreement on the tuition that you and Mel worked out, and we came to an agreement on special ed. And when we left that meeting, we were going to put that in writing and send you a contract. We put it in writing, we sent it to you. Gilbert turned around, rejected that, and then upped the tuition $100,000. So
We wanted to.
excuse me. You talked about how hard the superintendents worked together to come up with a figure, and then we approved it. The Gilbert negotiating team and the WPS negotiating team agreed to that figure, and then Gilbert unilaterally turned around and rejected it, raised the tuition, and there was no joint finance meeting after that to come up with how do we deal with that $100,000 shortfall. What happened is that money had to come out of the pre-K through 6 program, because you wanted to be sole designee.
That's correct.
Because we didn't give that to you, which was
That's
agreed
correct.
upon, at that last session was going to be a 2-line contract, 2-item contract, and then you reneged on it. That's what happened. Negotiations didn't break down until after you left the room, after you left and you returned to your board and you canceled the agreement. I think that needs to be very, very clear.
Well, I'm going to make it even clearer, because we did ask for the sole designation. We did not receive the sole designation. That's a very important piece of this. It was important to us. It was one thing that we wanted to have, was the sole designation. We could not get it, so as far as I'm concerned, that broke negotiations.
So as far as you're concerned, that resulted in charging the citizens of this town an extra $100,000 that you were willing to go without any discussion.
We returned to our budgeted, our tuition budgeted amount.
So you ignored the agreement that the 2 superintendents reached, that the 2 negotiating teams agreed with, correct?
Once we lost the sole designation, that is correct.
But you agreed to that before you left the negotiating room.
No, we did ask about sole designation throughout our negotiation period.
Yes, but when we came to, I'm just going to make this point. You can go around in circles over and over again, Tony, but the point is that all of us left that negotiating room. It had been agreed that there was only 2 things that were in agreement, and a contract was going to be written and signed based on that. And then Gilbert unilaterally reneged on that and then boosted the tuition $100,000 on Winchester taxpayers.
If we had gotten the negotiated point about the sole designation, I think we would have had a deal.
All right, I'm going to move on to Jack. Jack had his hand up before.
Thank you. So when I'm looking at the town manager's proposed budget that we as the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen have to make a decision on for all taxpayers next Thursday, there's a $240,301 deficit or delta difference. And that's the requirement that you're asking more for this year than the previous year. If we were to ask the taxpayers to pay $240,000 more, that's going to mean a tax mill increase. And if we are not in favor of a tax mill increase, we're going to have to cut either your budget or the government budget to bring it down to the same numbers that we had last year. If we, as the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, decide $240,000 is just not going to be appropriated more for education, then it's going to come back to a 1-line item decision, the line item decision for Board of Education for 2020-2021. Melanie, you get that in your hand. We then say to you, you have $240,000 less. There is no structure right now that you can immediately go back to the Gilbert School and say you need to split this with us 95 to 105% or 50-50 or however you want to do it. Am I correct on that? There's no structure for you to do that right now.
There is no legal structure for that. There has been a practice of collaboration in the past. Should that need to happen, I would, as a colleague, go to Dr. Serio and talk about how can we adjust this together.
And I understand from listening to both of your budgets, yes, we're facing tough times coming up for education. Taxpayers are facing tough times to pay for town government expenses, education expenses, their home expenses. We may decide in a week from now that we are not going to increase taxes. We are not going to provide an increase in mill rate, and therefore you're going to have to suffer a $240,000 reduction in your budget. I'm going to ask you, Tony, how much of a percentage can you take of that? And are you willing to give us some kind of an estimate right now of what that might mean?
No, Melanie already asked. The figure that she had quoted was north of 140,000. I can't remember if it was just under 150. She's already approached me on that. My response was, I think we ought to fight for the larger number. We know that we will have to do some sort of a compromise with Melanie. With the Winchester Board of Education, not just Melanie, but Melanie and I will talk about it. But in my analysis, I mentioned that with the PPP money, we had to do forecasting. Well, one of my forecasts has to do with that $150,000 or so that Melanie and I already talked about. That was part of the forecasting. So I'm sitting knowing that we could end up having a reduction, and I will have to take a look at how I'm going to reduce my budget in order to absorb a $150,000 deficit.
So of that 240, you're saying it's about 150,000 that...
Well, that's what I was requested about 144 is the number I'm trying to remember, Mel. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm using 150 in my projections.
And Mel, does that would mean another 100,000 from the pre-K through 6?
About 90, I think, Mel, you mentioned that day to me, that you could possibly reduce. Would pain.
And that's, I think, the piece of the puzzle here that everyone's missing. Going forward with this particular unknown situation, there is the distinct possibility that come December, I'm going to say, I'm going to run my budget into the red because this is what kids need.
And what happens if you do that?
I have to come to the Board of Selectmen and say I've run my budget into the red because we don't have the necessary funds to be able to support kids and what they need. I will argue that there will be no other population more affected by COVID than children that are in school. There will be no
I may agree with you that, Bill. I understand the educational value of all this. I also understand the requirements of our taxpayers who themselves are facing issues with their own jobs and being able to pay their own taxes. And
no doubt.
I'm not trying to put students at risk here. I'm not saying that we wouldn't support education, and that education is probably the most important thing for the future of our country and our lives. I understand all that. But if there comes to be a point where taxpayers are just not going to be able to afford issues, and it's now January 1st, and we're looking at the second round of taxes coming in, and they're not coming in, we're going to be looking at deficits all over.
I can say that, for the past going on 4 years now, Bob Geiger and I have worked very closely on making sure that we have been respectful of the taxpayers of Winchester throughout budget season and beyond budget season. And, I am committed to continuing that practice, but I'm also committed to making sure that our kids have what they need to be successful educationally. You'll see that in my budget, we're not doing a whole bunch of capital improvements right now. Capital improvements isn't where my money needs to go. My money needs to go to kids right now. So for me, that's a decision that I am making for our own organization in partnership with our Board of Ed.
And you in your position as superintendent and Dr. Serio in his position as head of schools, you have to take that position. I understand that. That's the educational position. But you also understand that we, as selectmen and as looking out for the taxpayers of the town, have a responsibility to them too.
Absolutely. Wholly respect that.
Thank you.
Candace, you had your hand up?
And our charter requires that we have a referendum for anything over $50,000. So if we don't budget, I mean, this happened in 2013 where the town was underfunded. And, you know, there's no harm in saying, you know, there's not enough money. We haven't budgeted for it because we don't know what, that's the point of emergency funding. But at least the taxpayers would have known the additional money that was needed and why. So I'm upset that the 100,000 was able to be given to the Gilbert without the other citizens knowing that there was a need, and they didn't have the chance, you know, for that vote, so that they weren't aware of that additional expense that was needed.
I have a question on the roof repairs, or more of a statement, I should say, not about the roof repairs. There's $177,000 that you're asking for a roof repair in the tuition line?
Yeah, that's correct. The actual cost of the roofs, one is 135 and the other one was body, so about 175
Right.
of it.
Okay, so if we're putting money, when we use money on the town side to repair things, we put it in the capital fund. It's not a reoccurring everyday expense, and it doesn't carry over into the following year. Once you do a roof, the roof is done, and then you can move on to a bridge, or then you can move on to a retaining wall. If we put money into the MBR line, the appropriated line, then what we're doing is we're allowing the $177,000 that you want an increase in tuition to be there for next year for another thing that you want to do. So I don't know that we should be putting $177,000 of your request into an ongoing funding for next year. So I think we're going to take a look at that. Just a one-time expense. And then I also like to get Bob Geiger to weigh in on here, because he did make a decision on forwarding us the budget numbers. So Bob, you want to
Sure.
share anything with us, please?
You know, for a number of years now, I've tried to be rational about what's going on. I've been aware since I came to town about the issue with a private school. But as being in turnaround management the majority of my life, I look at business models, and I look at competitive environments. So I'm very concerned about, if I compare, I asked Bruce to come up with some analysis of State Board of Education numbers that they provide. I just had them picked out the 10 closest towns of 169 towns that are very close to us in terms of socioeconomic indicators, which happens to be an annual income, per capita income. So of the lowest 10 towns that match us, or that we're equivalent to, with the salary, the annual income is between $33,000 and $34,000, which is a major socioeconomic indicator of what are our students like, what is our population like, what is the percentage of special ed, what is the percentage. I think if one would pursue these numbers, you'd find out that these are likely competitors in terms of business models, in terms of cost per pupil. We have the highest cost per pupil by $2,000 to $4,000 per pupil. Now, why is that? I tend to look at that and try to do some analysis I've done for 2 years. We've got duplication. We've got 2 superintendents, 2 administrative overheads. We've got an excessive cost model for our town. And we've got it with a high school system that has a broken model right now. There are going to be no Chinese students coming back next year. The model is broken. We need to consolidate. We need to reduce our costs. And I know I'm not making friends with this observation and commentary, but I've got to look at, we need budgets based on pre-COVID issues right now. So we're comparing apples to apples. We're going to have rescue packages from the feds, from the state, and we'll try to figure out how to deal for the differences after that. But right now, this school budget, the school should be asking us for a 5% reduction, not a $240,000 increase. So this just makes me livid when I see this just doesn't make sense as we try to talk about a kumbaya moment right now. Our taxpayers, we're going into the worst economy since World War II. This has to be addressed. We've got to figure out how to reduce the overall expense, but there's been no serious consideration for consolidation of superintendency. There's been no evaluation of class sizes. There's been no evaluation. We continue the same business model year after year, expecting different results. It's not working. Now, I don't know what else to say, but so that was my recommendation. You can overrule it. You can put it back in. That was my suggestion. But the increase, I am not increasing this taxpayers' mill rate. We've done this now. This is the 4th year without an increase. They should be demanding I have a decrease in the mill rate.
Okay. Doug, I saw your hand up.
I just wanted to say one thing in response to Bob's comments. We have been trying very hard to convince Gilbert that we should have a shared superintendent. And although there has been an ad hoc committee convened by the Gilbert School, I don't have a sense that that's going anywhere towards consolidation of administration right now. But we have worked hard towards that.
Well, let me ask, I'm also want to comment, I mean, this PPP, this is close to unethical and immoral. So we're going to pay, that was for salaries, and you're saying you're going to stash our salary and use it later for something else. To ask these citizens to pay after you're getting compensated, if you do indeed proceed this way, that is, I don't know how much more unethical you can get. That's ridiculous. I know that COVID's going to be a problem, and when the COVID comes up, the bailout packages are going to be there. Now, maybe you can't get it because you're a private entity. Well, that's up to Mel to try to pursue all of that for the total educational situation.
Unethical and immoral. So, and the issues that Cheryl raised, we, whether or not the application process was very simple. All we had to testify to the fact that there were certain certifications. We were able to do that, and in good faith made those certifications. That was the total of the application. There was no discussion about
money was for salaries
or things of that nature that was brought up. Ethical, we followed the certifications. The bank provided us with the figure, $923,200. They did the math. We did not do the math. We know that future forecasting is what other independent institutions are doing, taking a look at what is going to impact them in the coming years, maybe
that was to compensate their employees who lost their jobs in order to pay them. We're paying all your teachers.
Well, I can tell you that from that webinar, that these institutions are also paying their employees with their tuition, with their current tuition money.
It's a shell game.
Endowments, with their other sources of income. All of those are still possible, but because we're making a good faith effort to try to protect the kids that we're educating, that's the key here.
Your business model is broken. If we have representatives on a board and it's 5-4, we don't stand a chance in terms of a town and representation. You can't win. That game is rigged too. This is not a fair game. Your business model is broken and it needs to be addressed.
Well,
I'm done. I'm sorry.
Well, I appreciate you being done. I just want you to know that if the model is broken, then that's something that we should look at. I don't know if the model's broken. I have no idea if the model's broken. I do know that what we did in regard to seeking the PPP funds were not immoral. They weren't unethical. We followed the certifications, and I I know they were made in good faith, knowing that we were going to be facing some economic challenges in the years, to come.
All right, I think, Tony, I think one of the things I'd throw back in there is, I think the issue is that you're still receiving taxpayer dollars. Whether or not you, for me, whether or not you qualify for PPP, and you did the process, because there's a whole lot of PPP out there, a whole lot of money floating around, that I'm gonna pay twice. I'm paying your tuition for this year, you're gonna save that money, and then I'm gonna pay through my taxes, PPP, for you to have more money through my taxes. You keep saying that you're an independent school. How can you be independent when you receive 93.53% of your budget is from Winston taxpayers? How can you be independent? You have an endowment, you have a trust, but you split from them. The trust took in over $14 million from international students. They took and gave to the school system to educate those students like $5 million. You built a $2.8 million dorm on the trust side. You spent $131,000 on a engineering plan for a master campus. How does that fit in with the town of Winchester and the struggles we go through on every budget that we have? And I know the model was supposed to be that they would help pay for things, but we were just getting tuition. We weren't getting an above what we pay for a local student rate. We were getting the same amount. So I guess I think that's where the frustration comes in, is because it's from the taxpayer. It's from, we struggle, we haven't done roads, we haven't done roofs at Bachelor, and you're gonna do a roof and you want us to pay for it. We can't do our roads, and you're doing boilers. We have schools with boilers that were failing year after year, and you saved the money that the taxpayers gave you to then go and fix those things. You guys created the lease. The corporation and the trust created the lease. The taxpayers did not. But we have no building, and that's where we're stuck. We're stuck. You have the building. We have the students and the money again. So we're kind of stuck, and we keep staying stuck. We're always going to be stuck.
Yeah, the triple net lease, I just want to address something. My budget from the time I got there, and we had a low FTE of teachers and not many electives. My budget did go up. In fact, my budget went up, well, my last projected budget before the receivership really would have brought an increase altogether over the span of years of $1.25 million. Of that, one tenth was paid by the town of Winchester taxpayers, because the trust and the fact that they were sending us the international students were paying the increases, 90% of that tuition increase, as we tried to move back into having a staffing that could provide an educational set of courses, a program, an educational program that all our students, Winchester students, could take advantage of and advance themselves. So yes, the trust did start that program with the intent of helping out the town of Winchester, because we were not getting the monies we needed to truly run the educational program at the level that we wished to run it to. 1.2, I think it was like 1.280 million. That my budget would have gone up if I had gotten my last budget increase, which I did not. And only 10% have fell on the taxpayer. 90% was thanks to the trust having that international program.
We're gonna go with Tara. Sorry, I didn't see your hand. You were over on my screen, but I see your little hand now, and then Cheryl after you.
My apologies, because my comment goes back to the PPP.
Oh, no problem.
it's just my understanding that these COVID response funds, these emergency funds, are abbreviated not to necessarily scoot around information, but I think to address organizations that are in crisis mode, and so need these emergency funds quickly, to shorten the time that applications are reviewed and everything, not necessarily to leave particular information out. So I don't know, I just thought that I should mention what my understanding of those were.
I appreciate that, and one of the things that they are allowing the independent schools to do is to be able to do this economical forecasting to try to anticipate the effects of COVID. They want you to look at endowments, lines of credit, and also this major piece, of course, about enrollment, development. People who are donating money to the school, how that's all going to be affected as well. All part of the forecasting. So there are a number of things that one has to look at before they do the certifications.
Right, I have a pretty good handle on the application process. I'm just, and the purpose of it, but I just, my understanding was that it was for payroll, as everyone has already mentioned,
and we can use it for that.
Cheryl?
My understanding of the PPP intention, as was articulated by Steve Sudlak at our board meeting on Tuesday, was that you came up with this figure of $900,000+ to include the gap between your budget, your proposed budget, and what you may get this time, which would not be COVID related. And it's one thing for you to talk about that you're not going to be getting the foreign students, but that doesn't equal $930,000. I'm not done. I'm sorry. I'm not done. You have to let me finish. You have to let me finish, please. Okay? All right. So, if it's not if you can't establish that you did not have the resources, which you do because we're paying the tuition, the fact that only half of the amount that you've sought or getting was related to COVID directly related tuition reductions, you're not going to get forgiven. I attended that webinar, and in that webinar, what those were about private academies. That's what it was geared towards, and they were talking about how they're going to get more applications for financial aid, how there's going to be parents that are no longer going to send their kids to the school. That's what they were focusing as far as forecasting. Your forecasting about tuition only applies to the foreign students. So that does not equal the $930,000 that you requested. That's the problem, and that's the concern. And again, I beg for the Gilbert Corp and Trust to pledge that the Winchester taxpayers are not going to be paying that loan back for you.
I want to just point out that we did not calculate that number. That number is actually calculated by the bank. The application was a very simple process, and that was making sure that one made good faith certifications in regard to putting in the application. We did that. We were eligible. There were no conversations, there were no interviews, there was nothing actually to fill out except to check off the certifications. Like I said, we're going to keep very close track of this money. If there are monies left over or we're not going to spend, we're going to give it back to the government. That's what we'll do.
So
I'm concerned about next year and the COVID effect as well as the enrollment effect.
I understand that. However, Steve represented to our board on Tuesday that the figure included any possible budget shortfall between what the Board of Selectmen and the town approved and what you sought. That's one point. The second point is that you still have to show that you had no other resources, and you haven't done that. I know what the PPP application is. I filled one out for my own practice, okay? And I know it's based on 2 months worth, it's supposed to be based on 2 months worth of payroll, benefits, utilities, rent, which you have $1 a year or something, you know, so that's what it's supposed to be. That's where that figure came from. But at the same time, it's not going to be forgivable unless you show that you spent 25%, 75% on payroll, and you brought back people that you had furloughed or laid off. I don't know if you've done that yet, because I know you have laid off and furloughed some people. But the problem is that only that 75% may be forgivable at some point. That's part of the discussion. Again, if you're losing money because your, you know, foreign program has deteriorated, which has been deteriorating for as long as I've been in this town, the town of Winchester should not be paying for that. That is your bad business model, as Bob said, and, you know, we need to have a commitment from you. You're going to bankrupt this town. We have enough to deal with without your poor business management.
I see. Well, you know, this was my attempt to try to have a hedge of protection around us, as I have mentioned now on several occasions. I think it's a very important hedge of protection if, in fact, it is a risk because we might not be forgiven. We're going to go very slowly in utilization of the funds that will be in that reserve, with the intent that we will pay back. That we will pay back the loan if it's not forgiven. However, I think it makes sense to have monies available so that we're not bankrupting the town and we're able to provide an education to the students. That was the intent behind the PPP. And you mentioned the thing about hiring people or hiring them back. We are issuing letters to the people that we did lay off that we want them to come back to work. They will have to make that decision if they want to come back. I do know that if I face next year with shortfalls in the budget because of I can't resolve the $250,000 that I need to, what I call unresolved. If I take 150,000, that brings me up to 400,000. If the money's on coming in from the international program, that adds to all of that. That means I would be laying people off. And that is something that this PPP money is intended to keep people hired. There are advisements that come out constantly from the Small Business Association. There's also advisories that come out from the Treasury. Right now, it's true that these monies are supposed to be expended by June 30th. There could be an advisory that comes out that tells us that we can go beyond that because they understand that COVID's going to go into next year. And I'm talking about 2021. So there are advisories still to come that are going to further define the utilizations of these monies. And these monies, as those advisements come out, will either steer us to think we are at risk, we should return the money, or it has solidified the fact that this is going to be a forgivable loan. And as a forgivable loan, we will go forward. The issue of the business model was sound. There were geo-economical and geopolitical issues played out on a global stage that did affect our ability to continue to attract a population of students. That's, those are things that I don't have control over. I can't control that. Did we get up to 83 students? Absolutely. Did my food service program actually end up in the black during that year? Yeah, absolutely. Did the trust pay for 90% of any increases in my budget? Absolutely. So the business model did, unfortunately, take a hit as geopolitical issues changed around our globe. So, I appreciate the concerns that people have here this evening. I think we operated correctly. We filled out the application as we were supposed to for the PPP. I think I'm building that hedge to protect the school so it can still educate students next year, whether it's blended education, distance education, or we're in school. I would hope for the latter, but I'm realistic. I don't see it happening. And I think the most expensive form of education is going to be the blended model, which is also going to have renegotiations take place with unions. And this is what we have to understand. Here we are tonight, and I think Bob called it a kumbaya moment. Well, I can't think of a better time to have kumbaya, but instead we see division and fighting. Division and fighting, which is going to continue to not resolve anything. At a time when we should be working together to try to resolve these issues that exist. I wish that, quite frankly, we could sit down in a room and talk about these things. It was interesting to be felt like I was on a defense stand by Cheryl. You know, but you know what? As you can see, I have kept my calm. And why? Because I believe, as is written, that one should actually avoid strife. I try to avoid strife. I don't try to argue, and I don't try to have disparaging comments about individuals. I kind of follow a book that has a lot of great instruction in it, and that instruction is that you don't enter into strife. My world was based upon having communication to provide peace.
Well, I'm going to just offer one more thing, that this conversation is about the financial structure of what we're doing. This is not about whether or not we can all get along. Getting along is not the financial structure. The financial structure is what underlines this. You said you don't like us to fight. This isn't a personal fight. This is about, we are responsible as a board of selectmen to make sure that we represent the taxpayers of this town. And when we are looking at these things, we have to make sure that we look at the financial underlyings of all of this. And I think that's what we're doing. And I think that will be some decisions that we'll have to make going forward. So I think we're at the point of comments, unless anybody has a burning desire to make another one that's not repeatable from what we have, to maybe move on. Before I move on, I'd like to say congratulate Melanie on the gains that she put in their slideshow for the school system. If you really go in and take the time outside this meeting to go in and look at her presentation that's online, you'll see the gains that the students have made in terms of academic progress. That's in there, and I think that's exemplary. I think that it's outstanding. I think that your budget presentation too, in terms of everything that you included in there, the facts, the figures, and whatnot, we really appreciated that. And I know that we haven't been talking to you much tonight. You may be thankful for that because you're like, wow, they're over here. But I also want to recognize the work that you did to put all that together. And I certainly understand where your requests are and what you're trying to do within the entire school system and your responsibility to all students. So is there any other, I see Jack's hand up. Put your hand up if you want to, and I'll make an order, and then because we still have to move on to the town budget. So I'm going back and forth between my two screens here. I only see Jack's hands up. So Jack, go ahead, and then we will go to the Board of Selectmen budget part.
Thank you, Katie. In the closing comment that you just made, I think we see both the Gilbert School budget being worked on carefully and the public school budget being worked on carefully. None of us here at least I know as we sit on the Board of Selectmen, have personal issues with either Melanie or Dr. Serio. You guys are administrators and professional administrators knowing what is required. As Candy has said, we have to look at the needs of the taxpayers. And that's where we've been representing, and that's why we're elected to do our job. It is not a personal issue. It is a financial issue only. The fact that, Melanie, you developed some great increases in the ability and the scores of students, fantastic. That's what makes our town better than it was 5-7 years ago. We see people coming to this town because of that. The Gilbert School has done the same thing, has increased the ability of recognition of what it has offered to students. None of us would say anything negative towards theirs. We are working towards a financial budget that we can say to taxpayers, we have carefully evaluated what is possible and what can be paid for. And that's, I think, where our decision will be. That's where my decision will be.
Okay. So we'll be moving on to the town budget. Oh, I see Mr. Schroeder with his hand up. He came in at the last minute.
Thank you, Candy. You know, we have a collaborated budget proposal tonight, put together from Melanie and Tony, and I think we have to consider that it's been a long time since we've had that happen, that both of the school systems have been working together on the budget prior to the town meeting. You're responsible to the taxpayers, but I think you also have to be responsible to the students, who are the children of the taxpayers, or the grandchildren of the taxpayers. And therefore, when we have this time, which is an unprecedented school funding crisis threat, and it puts at a disadvantage a whole generation of children. Now, you know, making the schools ready to be open is a huge job. One of the things we know is that in order to have them move forward, I don't think you can reduce the budget and feel that that's a fair way to start a very difficult year. The needs that have to take place, we've already talked about these, I think, but as a taxpayer, as a grandparent, and as an educator, I understand that in opening up a staggered program, in other words, starting kids at different times throughout the day, is going to cost more transportation. The cleanliness of the school, having it sanitized, not only is that going to require more work when the schools are closed, it's going to be constantly wiping down with disinfectant desks, playground equipment, bathrooms, you name it, it's going to have to be cleaned. There's going to be the safety equipment that's required. We know that if you want to go out, you have to have a mask. Well, the kids are going to have masks when they come in. There was an article that was done about Thomaston in the Waterbury Republican, and it says in order to supply a school population of about 900 kids, 2 masks a day for the students and for the faculty, there's going to be a cost of $259,000 just for the masks. And that's if the kids don't lose them. Chance of that, pretty high, pretty high. We have and take into consideration that there was that wonderful outreach in Torrington over the week where they handed out 20,000 masks to people that are in need of them. 20,000 masks, according to that article about Thomaston, is 10 days worth of masks for school kids. The use of the school building, social distancing. Another thing mentioned there, you have a auditorium that has a list of, or a limit of 491 students. With social distancing, you can get 49 kids in there. So you're going to be using 25% of the space in your room for the kids that you could have up to this point. So, I hope that we can get back to school the way we remember it. We all have to realize that's not going to happen right away. Virtual school is not normal school. Virtual meeting is not a normal meeting. Now, in the meeting tonight, you had the ability just to mute everybody if you didn't want talking. Can you imagine as a teacher being able to mute everyone in your class except the ones you want to hear from? Everybody, I think, who's listening knows that their school would have been different if the teacher could have muted them. So, you know, it's not the same, virtual versus real. And if we want to get the students back in, I think what we have to do is we have to really consider, I know it's difficult, we have to really consider the proposed budget that was brought together by two professional educators working together in collaboration to try to give the best education we can to the kids who are not now taxpayers, but will be taxpayers, and to their parents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so what do you all say we, Board of Selectmen, everybody, we move on to the government budget? We good with that? Right, so I just have to go a little bit smaller and share my screen when I get over here to, this is the, let me just get there. Things are in my way. Some things have disappeared. Oh, here it is. Okay, so Board of Selectmen budget is here. Whoop. Let me go back a little bit and let me do share screen. I'm gonna share my screen. Sorry. Share. I want to share this one. So there it is. So here is, can you see this one, the Board of Selectmen budget? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So Bob, you and Bruce can speak, and I will move the slides along.
Okay. All right, let me start off with the highlights first, which is the big deal, which is the mill rate is unchanged at 33.54. It's been that way for quite a while now. Our grand list growth was 1.1%. And we can talk about what that means, but that 1.1% was approximately $260,000. Let's look at the next slide. That's what we had to work with in terms of slightly increased revenue and maintained existing mill rates. But the overall, as you can see, the town budget, the school's budget, and then the totals. So it was, you can see the difference there. We're talking about an increase of $323,000 total. The school budget was basically, I suggested it be the same. And the town side went up $333,000, and I'll talk about why that was. And let's look at the major components in the next slide, which were any significant changes in our budget. There was $81,000 for one addition to the highway department. There was $110,000, which were annual salary increases, because that had to do with union contracts and step increases within them. And there was $100,000 put in for the capital improvement budget, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. There was $49,000 we had to make as an increased contribution to the police pension plan. So most of these were required. That was a requirement. Let's look at the detail in terms of the capital. So this year again, we've actually reduced it. The first budget was a higher capital expenditure, but we saw what was coming, so we reduced it. But we've got $1.2 million, $1,233,000 for road repairs, of which 400,000 are normal repairs that we tend to do every year. But one big capital piece is Overlook Road, which we've been working on for several years now, and that road is now completely destroyed, and that's being replaced with water, sewer, gas lines. Everything was replaced on that road. So if you look at that road overall, it's a total rebuild in terms of all the drainage as well. So that was a big one there. There's also Pratt Street. I know you're all used to looking at those concrete abutments. We've kind of got used to them on the way up to the school, but that's about $100,000 job right there. And then we had various projects, smaller ones that total up to about 108,000, but overall, that's the way most of that money breaks down. In terms of equipment, even though we show $444,000 there, actually, as we pointed out on that slide, 274,000 that has really been spent. It's multiple year financing that continues throughout as a result of earlier purchases. We were planning to spend $140,000 replacing our two Ford F-550s, which are pretty big trucks for Fords, which are it's smaller than our large trucks for basically snow plowing and some of the other work that's done in town, and $40,000 for the replacement of one of our large trucks. So we've been trying to replace a lot of pretty poor equipment we've had over the past several years, which we hadn't replaced, and we've been doing that for the past 3 to 4 years now. But we went through many years without replacing any of our equipment. We were actually spending more money on the equipment than it was worth. But the other 274 went to 6 different pieces, which we purchased over time. But let's talk about there, and then we are having to spend some money on town hall. We put off our boiler in here, which is a $50,000 job, for about 3 years. Last year we had serious problems heating the building. A lot of people had space heaters trying to stay warm. Likewise, some of the plumbing we're replacing is over 30, 40, 50 years old. We are spending a little more money on security, which in terms of electronic security, door entries, cameras, things of that nature, doing some just general maintenance on the elevator, which hasn't been done in a while as well. There's $87,000, that was just for one police vehicle, and upgrade on several radios in all the ongoing cars. There's $50,000 for the Soldiers Monument for the windows as they continue to improve that project, which happens to be our town logo. Also, we had $45,000 additional money which we put forward to our eventual grand list revaluation, because that's going to be probably over $200,000. This is the 3rd year of 5 years putting money forward to have that money ready for completion. We did reduce the money for elementary school closure fund, which we don't believe we're going to have to do. So basically, those are the highlights. Of course, the entire budget's available online. But let's please put any questions. Let's talk about some more of the detail and answer questions.
Okay, again, I'm looking for hands in here. Oh, my screen got smaller, so I could see you all on one side. Anybody have any questions? Again, we will be doing this again on May 18th, which is next Monday. Today's what, the 14th? I lost track of days. Nobody goes to work anymore, so I can't keep my schedule straight. So anyway, so we will be doing this again on May 18th, and having, again, you can make public comment through email, you can make public comment through phone, you can make public comment through regular mail, you can make public comment from 6 feet away with masks on. Anyone? Jack?
I asked the same question in the Board of Education. What would they do if there was a 240,000 deficit? If we were to increase your budget by what they're looking for, the $240,000, what would that do to the mill rate that you're saying right now is unchanged at 33.54?
Well, a mill's about 750,000, so you're talking about a third of a mill rate. Or I'll go back in here and lay off people, stop paving roads, don't replace equipment. There's lots of ways to approach absorbing 240,000 other than increasing the mill rate. I've just increasing the mill rate to me is just something just not acceptable to the citizens of this town.
Okay, so as I asked the Board of Education, they have had a conversation about what would happen if the $240,000 was reduced from their budget. If we increased it $240,000, do you have a list of what you would decrease in the in the government budget?
Well, I would come back to you, I mean, I could come up with several alternatives, and I'd come back to the selectmen and say, okay, here's your menu. Which of these do you want to cut? And I can try to give you the implications of that. And, so, I mean, I can develop, I mean, we're always prepared to do that.
Well, I recognize it is our budget now to make those kinds of decisions, but I was just wondering if you had any kind of recommendations of if that was to happen, what?
Well, the last thing, I hate cutting roads. I mean, we need, I'd like to spend even more money on roads if I could. We didn't include almost nothing for sidewalks. I mean, there's equipment one could take out, but like I said, in some cases I'm spending more on repairs than the vehicle cost to replace. So we'd have to do an evaluation of Public Works to see what would happen if we wouldn't replace anything now that we've been rebuilding. So I've given you the list of capital, so you could see that list. I could also not hire the one person that I was going to hire. Public Works asked me for two, and I reduced it by one. I took out $1 million project for the rebuilding of Elm Street already, which is that whole intersection. So I mean, I just go to the capital list, and or I could say, hey, you know, I could lay off a cop. I could lay off people. So there's various ways to approach what would be the least painful or most acceptable.
Okay, and when we meet next Monday, we can further have that discussion if the board decides, you know, we need some of those figures. But I was just wondering tonight, if you could give us some kind of what reductions would happen, what recommended reductions you might propose. That's all I was asking. Thank you.
I would do that without talking to my staff first.
Anybody else have anything? Candace?
Vehicles that you want to purchase, plows. I noted in your, the document that those vehicles are 1998.
Yes.
So your two of those vehicles, which is street sweeper and a plow truck, both are 1998. So they're not any recent, you know, they're not a lease, you know, turnover plan like we have for the police department. Additionally, you have other items in here, and part of that's being funded by the state grants for LoadSIP and also allocation from the general fund balance. So in order to meet your capital improvement requirements, we are, you know, utilizing other outside sources other than raising taxpayers' money.
Correct.
We're spending
Correct.
really $1,800 versus the $1,250, and that's supported by other funding.
Correct.
Anyone else?
Sandy, can you hear me?
Just 1 second, please. Do you have a video?
No, negative, I do not. This is Captain Kaczynski. I want to ask Robert a straight question. Because of the seriousness of the COVID-19, it has been across the nation. Many companies are likely susceptible and would not be able to recover from the economic devastation they're encountering. Our town has always been on the cusp of collapse. You know that as well as I do. We lost it in '55 with the flood, and then we had problems with Henry and a few other problems that really have sustained the town and her very deeply. But we have got a situation here where we're going to still lose people across the nation, and we're going to have a serious economic downturn. It's inevitable. You can't help it. There will be. And it's going to be a change to all our lifestyles. So my question is that 1.1% on the grand list That's not sustainable. I don't believe that is. I think that's going to go down. We have to look at what we're going to do and ramp up our efforts for economic development. And I've been pushing for many number of years to get someone into town hall who would be generally the one person who gives all effort toward getting businesses into this town. It's going to make it 10 times harder now with the situation with the COVID. But we need someone in there that's going to be able to, because Bob can't do it. I mean, he's town manager. He's got his hands full. What we need is to see what we can do about if Bob can find it, where we can get somebody that can put in, let's say, 25 hours a week toward looking at all the various technical business magazines, talking with people, getting on the phone. We got to expand our outside of our box. And I do mean Connecticut. If we can bring some outside, that would be great. Right now, as far as the Hinsdale School, I think that project is DOA. I don't think the state is going to be able to come up with the necessary grant money to get that project off the ground. And I don't, like you said, and you were all discussing, how much more can you impose upon the citizens of Winchester by subjecting them to, say, a bond issue for $10 million? I don't see it. That's something I don't think that we can afford to do. I'm not going to be around to see that paid off. That's why I'm 71 now, and my wife is 69. We're both in that susceptible age period where I'm worried about the carbon and so forth. But anyway, let me, at least you and I have had differences in the past. All I can say is tonight, bravo, bravo. You did a well job, well dictated, and presented your case very admirably. And the same thing with Robert. So you two have done an admirable job. But I have no more to say.
All right. I didn't really want to. I just want to comment. Education is the biggest issue we have in this town. Building a new school, Hinsdale, the percentage of money that we're going to receive, and we will receive from the state, we're high on the priority on that list. And the best things we can do for economic development for this town is to have a great school system, from pre-K through the college. Both schools. Gilbert, our blue and gold needs to be our high school. I would love to see that happen. I need a great school system in order to recruit businesses to come to this town. That's the number one priority. That's right.
I'm not denying that comment, Robert, but it's been stated over and over. I mean, Harvard, Yale, even my academy is suffering for want of tuition funds, and so there's a serious problem with higher education finding the necessary capital to continue operation. What you just said is absolutely true, but you got to find the capital to keep going. And if you got these big outfits, basically begging they're looking for tuition, and the students aren't coming back to pay the tuition. I don't know. I'm not a financial wizard, right? But I think it's like you and I both tend to think for practicalities because we're old sailors and whatnot. But it's a tough situation we're in. The whole country is. Okay. So anyway, you're doing well. You're doing well, and I can see that.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? If not, the next item on the agenda is adjournment. Anybody like to make that motion? Steve? Make the motion to adjourn, I imagine. I mean, you? Okay, Steve made the motion to adjourn, even though we didn't hear him, but I saw his mouth going.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Board of Selectmen, all in favor of adjournment? Unanimous? Okay, thank you all. We'll see you on May 18th.
Good night, everyone. Good night.
Hey, Dad. Oh, that's right, we're gonna put our mask back on. I forgot about that. 10 o'clock. We haven't done a 10 o'clocker in how long?
No, not much on the town budget.
No. There won't be. We'll keep everything even. There are only 9 people on live stream, I just looked.
Really?
Yeah, nobody's watching us. Nobody's writing about us. Nobody's doing anything. So we could take that as a good sign, or we could take it as a not so good sign. I don't know what to take it as.
Well, time will play it out.
All I know is we had a heart attack with 2 issues tonight, the Zoom and